Last night, someone slaughtered his entire family, burned down the house, struck his name from the family register, and they stabbed him in the ribs with a dagger and drowned him in the swamp. They left, convinced the boy was dead. There was one thing they didn't know. Inside this boy's head lives a military analyst with 7 years of intelligence experience, and he's already counting their mistakes. Hayden twitches and swallows swamp sludge. It burns his lungs. He rolls onto his side and vomits black water into the rotten sedge. His hands are tied. A rope is around his neck. A wound throbs beneath his ribs. They beat him in a hurry. They didn't finish him off. A thick, sweet fog surrounds him. It smells of swamp gas and dead fish. And as he lies face down in the water, he tries to figure out one thing: who he is. His memory comes in fits and starts, in 2 layers. One layer screams, "Your name is Hayden Orwell. You're 23. Last night, someone slaughtered your family and burned down the family estate. You were stabbed and dumped like carrion." The second layer speaks calmly and coldly. "You're a military intelligence analyst and cartographer. 7 years in hotspots." Satellite imagery, interrogations. A winding mountain road. The headlights of a logging truck shine directly into his face. Death. Both layers are true. Both layers are him, and neither one will pull him out of the icy water with his hands tied and a hole in his side. Hayden presses his chin to his chest and breathes slowly. Not shock. Taking stock. Who attacked him? How many of them? Where did they come from? He thinks just like a post-op debriefing. He rubs the rope against a protruding root. 10 minutes. His fingers are going numb. Blood spreads like a brown cloud. His hands are free. He lifts his head above the water. And this is where the strangest thing begins. Thin lines emerge above the mist, as if someone were drawing with a pencil right in the air. One line cuts straight through the marsh and illuminates the ford. The bottom is solid. The water is chest deep. Beyond that lies a dry islet, and on it 2 silhouettes in dull red. Each has a crossbow. The monitoring team. They've come to make sure the kid is definitely dead. Hayden goes underwater. Only his nose and eyes are above the surface. His heart is pounding. He clamps his hand over it. Not now. Right now, you're watching. He's been lying in the water for an hour. His body is shivering from the cold. The wound is burning. But he's watching. Every 6 minutes, the crossbowman on the left turns to his left. There, under a snag, marsh rats are gnawing at his canteen. 6 minutes, like clockwork. The one on the right is limping. He's putting his weight on his left leg. His right shoulder is lower. An old wound. He won't be able to turn quickly to the right. There's a blind spot between them, exactly where the wind is blowing from. Hayden is crawling, not toward them, between them, across the very same ford that the lines in his head have highlighted as safe. The water is chest deep. The bottom holds. He moves so slowly that the birds don't take flight. His fingers clutch a fragment of a rusty gaff underwater. Long, heavy. It'll do. He emerges onto the islet from the side of the limping man, from the side of the injured shoulder. The rats rustle louder. The man on the left jerks his head. 6 minutes. Hayden stands behind the right-hander and strikes with the gaff. Not at the man, at the bowstring. The bowstring snaps with a click. The bolt flies into the sky. The right-hander screams. The left-hander turns of the scream and pulls the trigger. The bolt pierces his partner's chest. The left-hander freezes, staring at what he's done. Hayden strikes his hands with the gaff. The crossbow falls into the mud. The whole thing took 4 seconds. A minute later, Hayden has 2 crossbows, dry boots, a cloak, a knife, half a sack of salted meat, and the first entry on his new map. These 2 were sent by someone who knows that Hayden is wounded under his left rib. That means this person was at the estate that night. That means Hayden will recognize him. He drags the bodies into the water. The man on the left is still breathing. Hayden looks him in the eyes. He wants to ask who sent them, but the man on the left isn't breathing anymore. The bolt severed something vital. There's no pity, only cold clarity. They came to make sure he was dead. So someone really wants the Orwell family to disappear entirely. The name has been crossed out. The estate has been burned down. His parents and older brother are dead, and he was dumped in the swamp with a knife in his side and a rope around his neck. As far as the entire kingdom is concerned, Hayden Orwell died last night. To the south lie the gray marshes, the swamps, the place where Ainwald cast out those he wishes to forget. Outcasts, fugitives, deserters, lepers, People without a name and without law. The Crown pretends the marshes don't exist. Tax collectors aren't sent here. Witnesses aren't taken from here to court. Hayden looks at his hands that aren't his own. Younger, thinner, without calluses. The long fingers of a nobleman's son who never worked in the fields. But his mind, 7 years of intelligence work, thousands of reports stitched together into a single picture. Hundreds of interrogations where he caught the moment in a person's eyes when they began to lie. The skill of turning chaos into structure. And now that skill works differently. Those lines in the air, that glow on the silhouettes. This isn't delusion, it's a map. A living map of the terrain unfolds in his mind with every step. He crossed the ford and memorized it forever, in 3 dimensions, with the slopes, the density of the riverbed, and the current. It's as if someone had sewn a satellite image into his brain, only in greater detail. With smells and sounds. Hayden heads south, deeper into the marshes, further away from dry land. Every step is plotted on the map, every bump, every bend in the channel. 2 hours later, he knows this stretch of marsh better than anyone else alive. After 3 hours, he finds a place to spend the night. An island the size of a room. 3 old willows. Their roots have woven together into a platform above the water. On 3 sides, impassable marsh. The only approach is from the north, along a narrow ridge you wouldn't see unless you knew it was there. He builds a fire, a small one, smokeless. His hands are shaking. The wound is oozing. He washes it and bandages it with a strip of cloth from the slain man's cloak. A lousy bandage. By morning, it had become inflamed. But he has to survive until morning. He gnaws on the salted meat. Tough, over-salted. The most delicious food in both of his lives. And he thinks, not about revenge, about the structure. The Orwell family held the borderlands right by the marshes. Not a wealthy house, not one of the Great Five, but the lands were in a strategic location. Someone wanted those lands specifically. Someone powerful enough to wipe a family name from the ancestral register in a single night. This isn't a baron's level, not a count's level. This is the level of the chancellery, maybe higher. The map in his head pulses with a quiet light. It's waiting. It needs more data, more steps, more faces, more names. And he'll give them to her. They think he's dead. They're wrong. Tomorrow he'll head further south. Tomorrow the map will grow. Tomorrow he'll find the first living person in these swamps and learn his name. And then another. And he'll keep finding them until he's gathered enough threads to pull the right one. Sleep comes quickly, heavy and black. The swamp around him breathes. The fog rises and falls like the chest of a sleeping beast. And somewhere deep underwater, in the flooded ruins that are 1,000 years old, something stirs. Something old and patient. It had waited a very long time. And finally, it had waited long enough. Morning never comes in the marshes. The darkness simply turns gray. Hayden opened his eyes and for the first 3 seconds couldn't figure out where he was. Then the pain in his side reminded him. The wound had become inflamed. He knew this would happen. The skin around the cut was hot and red. The pus hadn't set in yet, but it would by evening if he didn't find something to treat it with. He ate the remains of the salted meat. He washed it down with swamp water strained through a cloth. It tasted of iron and peat. He'd have to get used to it. The map in his head was working. The islet where he'd slept now lay there as a 3-dimensional model. Every root, every stone, the direction of the wind, the depth of the water around him, and something new. Overnight, the map had begun to update on its own. He sensed that something heavy had passed along the ridge from the north. Not a person. 4 paws. A large beast. It had passed by and headed east. Hayden touched the map in his mind the way one touches a sore tooth. It responded, quietly, obediently, waiting for his next steps. He headed south. Every step expanded the map. Every bump fell into place. An hour later, he came to a channel 10 steps wide. Murky water, a weak current, mangrove thickets on the opposite bank. The map highlighted a ford, knee-deep. The bottom was rocky. Hayden crossed. Beyond the mangrove trees, the ground grew firmer. Footprints appeared. Human. Bare feet. Small. A woman or a teenager. Old. About 3 days, heading southwest. Hayden followed the trail. Not because he wanted to find a person, but because a person in the swamp knows where to find food and where danger lies. 2 hours later, he found a hut. The word hut was a generous description. 4 posts, a roof of turf and branches, 1 wall made of woven reeds. The other 3 sides were open. Inside, on a bed of moss, lay a woman. Her red hair was tangled and dirty. She was thin. Her left arm was wrapped in rags from shoulder to wrist, an old burn. She heard his footsteps and opened her eyes, gray-green, feverish, a knife in her right hand, short, rusty. She held it correctly, blade pointing away from her, thumb on the hilt. Someone had taught her. Hayden stopped 5 steps away. Carta assessed her instantly. Her right leg was injured, a dislocation or a fracture. Her ankle was swollen. She won't be able to walk for at least a week. She last ate 2 days ago. Bundles of herbs were drying next to her bedding. They were hung up neatly, sorted by type and size. A herbalist. He saw how her fingers on the knife turned white with tension. She was waiting for him to attack. Hayden slowly crouched down. He placed his knife on the ground in front of him. He pushed it aside with his hand. She watched his every move. He asked what had happened to her leg. She remained silent. About 10 seconds passed. Then she said she'd sprained it on the rocks 3 days ago, that the swelling wouldn't go down. Her voice was hoarse, low for a woman. Hayden asked how she'd ended up in Topi. She didn't answer right away. She said that the peasants from the village north of the highway had accused her of cursing their livestock, that they'd come at night with torches, that they'd tried to burn her. She nodded toward her left hand. It hadn't been completely burned. She'd fled into the swamp. Hayden looked at the herbs she was holding. He asked which ones reduced inflammation. She named 3. He didn't know one of them. The other 2 grew everywhere around here. The map immediately highlighted the nearest thickets, 200 steps to the east, by the channel. Hayden stood up. He said he'd be back. She didn't say anything. She just gripped her knife more firmly. He found the herbs in 20 minutes. The map guided him precisely. He cut as much as he could carry. He brought them back. The woman looked at the bundles in his hands, then at him, then back at the herbs. She asked how he knew which ones were needed. Hayden replied that she had named them herself. She shook her head. She said she had named 3 types, but he had brought 5, and she hadn't named 2 of them. But they were the right ones. Hayden said nothing. He didn't know himself. The map had highlighted them. It showed the connection between the plants and the inflammation. He didn't bother to explain it. The woman looked at him for a long time. Then she put the knife away. She introduced herself. Era Lowe, 26 years old, an herbalist from the northern villages. Or rather, a former herbalist. Now just a cripple in the swamp. Hayden gave his name. Just his first name. No last name. He sat down against the wall and began treating his own wound with the herbs he'd brought. Era watched as he crushed the leaves and applied them to the cut. She told him he was doing it wrong, that he had to mix it with swamp clay first, that without the clay, the sap would burn his skin and make it worse. Hayden handed her the leaves. She made the poultice in silence. Her hands moved quickly and precisely. Even with her left, burned hand, she moved with confidence. Habit, years of practice. Pain with every movement, but her hands remembered what to do. When she finished, Hayden felt the heat in the wound begin to subside. Slowly, but it was subsiding. He thanked her. She didn't answer. She just lay back down and closed her eyes. He stayed. He repaired the hut's roof. One of the supports had rotted, and the roof was sagging on the west side. By nightfall, the roof was secure. He chopped some reeds and covered the second wall. Not the third. He left one side open to the south. A warm wind blows from there, and you can see the approach. Era hadn't asked him to do that. She woke up in the evening and saw the new wall. She looked at it. She didn't say anything. For the next 5 days, Hayden left in the morning and returned in the evening. Every day he went in a new direction. He expanded the map. On the second day, he found a stream with clear water. On the third, he found patches of berries that hadn't yet rotted from the dampness. On the fourth, he found an old fishing net caught on a submerged tree. He mended it. He set it in the current. By morning, there were 3 fish in the net. He brought everything to Era, not as a gift, as raw materials. She knew what to do with it, which berries were poisonous, which fish could be eaten raw and which only when cooked, and how to dry meat in the wind without salt. He supplied her with the world, and she made it fit for life. The map grew. By the 5th day, it covered an area half a day's journey in every direction, and Hayden began to notice something else. Threads, subtle connections between things. The fishing net wasn't just a net. It was woven with a special knot, a southern knot. They don't use those in Ainwald. So someone from the south had been here, a long time ago, maybe years ago, but they were there. The barefoot tracks that had led him to Era's hut. They weren't hers. She couldn't walk, so someone else had come to this hut before him, and left. The tracks led southwest. Hayden hadn't followed them yet, but he remembered. On the 6th day, Era spoke of her own accord for the first time. Not about herbs, not about the wound. She asked why he was here, in the marshes, with a stab wound and wearing someone else's boots. Hayden paused. Then he said that his family had been killed, that he himself had been left for dead, that he was now erased. Era nodded. as if she'd heard the weather forecast. In the marshes, everyone has a story like that. Killed, burned, struck off the list, abandoned. The only difference is in the details. She said you couldn't survive here alone in winter, that the marsh freezes on the surface, but not all the way through. The ice is thin. If you fall through, you won't get out. That you need shelter, a proper one, with a hearth and walls. Hayden nodded. He already knew. The map had shown him 3 places within a half-day's journey where they could build. One of them was special, an old mill, submerged up to its waist, but the walls were stone. The roof was partially intact, on an island large enough for 12 people, accessible from only one side. Everything else was impassable marshland. He told Era. He described the place, the distance, the route. She listened. Then she asked how he knew all this if he'd only been here 6 days. Hayden didn't answer. She didn't press the issue. On the 7th day, Era's leg had healed enough for her to stand. She was limping, but could walk, slowly, with a cane. Hayden suggested they head to the mill. Era agreed. They set out at dawn. Hayden led the way. The map plotted a route along dry ridges, bypassing the marshes. Where an ordinary person would have drowned, he placed his foot precisely on a hidden rock beneath the water. Era followed him, silently. Only occasionally did she stop to pick a root or a mushroom. A herbalist can't pass them by, even with a sore foot. By noon they had arrived. The mill was in better condition than he'd expected. The walls were made of gray stone, thick. There was a breach in one spot, but it could be patched up. 2/3 of the roof was intact. The mill wheel had rotted and fallen into the water, but the millstones were still in place. Inside it was dry. The stone floor was raised above the water level. 2 rooms. One was livable, the other could be used to store supplies. Hayden stood in the doorway and looked around. The map fit this place like a glove. Every stone, every crack, lines of sight, blind spots, escape routes, a spot for a lookout on the roof. He turned to Era. He said they would survive the winter here. She leaned against the wall. She looked up at him. For the first time in a week, there was something in her eyes besides wariness. Not trust yet, but something close to it. She said she needed a hearth. Stones for it, clay for the mortar, and a vent in the roof, or else they'd suffocate. Hayden nodded. The map already showed where the clay was, where the stones were, what the wind angle was on the roof. They set to work. They spent 10 days settling into the mill. Hayden built a hearth out of stones found at the bottom of the channel, heavy, flat, suitable. The map led them to the clay, 200 paces to the south, near the bank of the old riverbed, rich and gray. Era showed him how to mix the mortar with grass fibers so it wouldn't crumble when heated. He cut a pole from a young ash tree and built a chimney through the hole in the roof. Rough, but the smoke went up instead of into the room. On the 3rd day, he bricked up the hole in the wall, stones and clay. By evening, the wall was solid. Not pretty, but solid. Era watched him work in silence. Sometimes she offered a suggestion. More often, she just watched. She took over the 2nd room. She hung herbs along the walls. She arranged roots and mushrooms on the shelves that Hayden had cobbled together from the fragments of a mill wheel. The smell in the mill had changed. Instead of dampness and rot, it smelled of wormwood and dried mint. On the 5th day, Hayden set out to scout. Far away, for a whole day. The map demanded steps. He headed southwest, following the very same tracks he'd seen before. Bare feet, small ones. The tracks led him to a spot the map had highlighted as a dense cluster. Something valuable, something forgotten. He found it at the bottom of a dried-up channel, beneath a layer of silt and roots. An old wagon train. 3 wagons sunk into the ground, long ago, maybe 20 years, maybe 50. The fabric had rotted away. The wood had turned black. But in one of the wagons, beneath the debris of the sidewall, lay a chest, heavy, reinforced with iron. The lock was completely rusted through. Hayden pried it open with a rock. Inside were tools, blacksmith's tools, a hammer, pliers, a set of chisels, 3 files. Everything was covered in rust, but the metal beneath was intact. Good steel. Next to the chest, in the mud, he found something else. A sack of bog iron, raw ore, heavy, brown, about 20 kilograms. Someone had been hauling all this somewhere. They didn't make it. Hayden took the tools. He left the ore where it was. He marked the spot on the map. He'll come back when there's someone to work with it. On the way back, he stumbled upon a man. Not exactly. The map warned him. A red silhouette behind the trees. One person, motionless. Hayden stopped. He watched for a minute. The man was sitting on a hummock, an old man, a gray beard down to his chest, clothes made of animal skins and coarse fabric, a broken sword on his lap, rusty, useless as a weapon. But the old man held it carefully, like a relic. Hayden stepped out from behind the trees into the open. The old man raised his head. His eyes were cloudy. One eye was blind, whitish. He looked at Hayden for a long time. Then he asked where Hayden had gotten his boots. Hayden replied that he'd taken them from a dead man. The old man nodded, as if there were no other answer in the marshes. Hayden sat down next to him, not across from him, next to him, on the neighboring hummock. It was safer that way for both of them. No one looks the other person straight in the eye. Carta was reading the old man, his left hand. 3 fingers were bent and wouldn't straighten, an old injury, from blacksmithing. His burned fingers had fused to the hammer's handle and healed improperly. This man had been a blacksmith. Hayden asked how long he'd been in the marshes. The old man said 12 years, maybe 13. He'd lost count. His name was Goran. He didn't give a last name. People in the marshes don't use last names. Hayden asked why he was sitting alone. Goran replied that he'd been heading south, to the old camp. But the camp was gone. It was broken up a month ago by the Westmar people. They came with dogs. Anyone they caught, they hanged from the trees. Goran fled. Now he's here. He has nowhere to go. Hayden looked at the broken sword fragment in the old man's hands. He asked whose it was. Goran remained silent. Then he said he'd forged it himself, for a young baron, a long time ago, in another life. The baron was killed. The sword was broken. Goran was cast out. Hayden didn't ask which baron it was for. Not now. He took his blacksmith's tools out of his bag, a hammer, pliers, and chisels, and laid them in front of Goran. The old man stared at them, then at Hayden, then back at the tools. His broken fingers twitched. Hayden said he had a mill, stone walls, a hearth, and a place for an anvil, and 20 kilograms of bog iron, a 2-hour walk away. He needed a blacksmith. Goran said nothing. Then he picked up the hammer, with one hand, the one with the broken fingers. He turned it over in his hand, held it up to his palm, said it was a good hammer, northern steel. They haven't made ones like this in 30 years. Then he stood up. He said he'd lead the way. Hayden followed. By evening, they reached the mill. Era came out to meet them. She looked at Goran. Goran looked at her scorched hand. He said they now had a whole club of fire victims. Era didn't smile, but the corner of her mouth twitched. Hayden gave Goran the second room. He made his bed by the hearth. On the very first night, Goran took apart one of the millstones. The stone turned out to be just right. He began to carve a sort of anvil out of it, with his broken fingers, slowly, stubbornly. Hayden lay by the fire and listened to the pounding, steady, dull, like a heartbeat. The map in his head was expanding. Now there were 3 people on it. Himself, Era, Goran, and the first threads were stretching between them. Era heals, Goran forges, Hayden finds. It's not a system yet. It wasn't an organization yet. 3 people in an abandoned mill in the middle of a swamp. But it was a start. 3 days later, Goran forged the first knife. Small, a little crooked, made from swamp iron that Hayden had carried back in 2 trips. The blade was black with impurities. Not a thing of beauty, but sharp. Goran held it in the palm of his hand and looked at it as if it were a child. He hadn't forged anything in 12 years. His fingers ached. He didn't complain. On the 4th day, Hayden set off northward, toward the border of the Tope, where the swamp gave way to dry land. He walked for half a day. The map led him along safe trails. By noon, he was lying in the reeds on the bank of the last channel and looked at the road. A track. A muddy, rutted path, but well-traveled. Carts traveled along it. Peasants. Merchants. A single mounted detachment of 5 riders. A coat of arms on their breastplates. Hayden couldn't see it clearly, but the map highlighted the emblem. A fox on a green field. Westmar. They were riding south, along the marshes, without entering the swamp. A patrol. Routine. Hayden memorized the time, the direction, the number, weapons, the first route to dry land. On the way back, he noticed a boy on the trail by the swamp, about 12 years old, barefoot, in a tattered shirt. He was gathering something into a basket. Berries. The map read him instantly. A villager, skinny to the point of showing his ribs, calluses on his hands from a rope. A boatman or a fisherman. He'd come to the swamp for berries because there's nothing to eat in the village. Hayden walked up to him. The boy flinched and backed away. Hayden held out his empty hands. He asked which village he was from. The boy named it. A village on the northern road. A 4-hour walk. Hayden asked what was new in the village. The boy looked at him suspiciously. Then he said things were lousy in the village. A new steward from the Westmars. He takes half the grain. 2 men were hanged last month for non-payment. Hayden listened. He memorized it all. Every word was marked on the map as a new point, a new thread. He took a piece of dried fish out of his bag and gave it to the boy. The boy grabbed it and started eating right in front of him, greedily, hardly chewing at all. Hayden asked the boy his name. The boy said Tobias. Hayden said that if Tobias came to the swamp once a week, he'd give him food, and a blanket, and something warm for the winter. Tobias looked at him. He asked what he wanted in return. Hayden replied, news. Just news. What was happening in the village? Who had come? Where they were going? Tobias thought for a moment. He nodded. A week later, he came back with news. And that's how Hayden's first thread into the dry lands appeared. Thin, fragile, a boy for the sake of hot bread and a warm blanket. But it was a thread, and a stream of information was already flowing through it. A mercenary captain had arrived in the village. He drank at the tavern for 3 nights in a row. He bragged to the prostitutes. He said he'd completed a big job for the Westmores, that he'd have enough money to last until spring. He had a burn scar on his right arm and a limp in his left leg. Hayden listened. The map was drawing a portrait. The captain, mercenary, worked for the Westmars. Big job, burn scar, limp. Drinking for 3 nights at the inn on the border of Topi. Not hiding, not afraid. Thinks the job is done and there's no one left to seek revenge. Hayden lay by the hearth in the mill and stared at the ceiling. The image burned in his mind. Vivid. Vivid. That captain was at the Orwell's estate that night. A burn scar on his arm. A limp from something that happened in the house. Maybe he was wounded. Maybe he fell. It didn't matter. He was there. He was the hitman. Hayden closed his eyes. The first target. Not the main client. Not Westmar. The hitman. The captain who personally came into the house. Who personally slit the throat. Hayden felt no rage. Rage gets in the way. He felt the same cold clarity as on the first day. A dot on the map that needed to be erased. Neatly. Without a trace. So that everyone would conclude it was an accident. He began to plan. Hayden spent 7 days preparing. He took his time. Haste kills more surely than a knife. Through Tobias, he learned the captain's schedule. The mercenary's name was Derek Fall. He didn't live in the village, but at an inn an hour's walk to the north. Every evening he went down to the tavern. He drank until the 3rd watch. He'd walk back to the inn alone, along a path through an alder grove, a 15-minute walk. No guards. Why would a man whom no one was looking for need guards? Hayden walked that path twice. The first time was during the day. He walked from the tavern to the inn. The map absorbed every step, the slope of the road, where the mud was, where the rocks were, where the branches hung so low that a drunk man would duck and lose his balance. The second time was at night. He lay in the bushes by the path and listened. At midnight, Derek Fall walked along the trail. Hayden saw him, and the map lit up. A large man, broad shoulders, limping on his left leg. His right hand was bandaged. The burn scar still bothered him. Drunk, but not dead drunk. He walked steadily, out of habit. A seasoned drunk. A sword at his belt. Short, a utility sword. No adornments. A tool. Hayden didn't attack. He returned to Topi and thought it over for 3 more days. Derek Fall was bigger than him, stronger, an experienced fighter even when drunk. A head-on fight would mean death. Hayden wasn't a fighter. He was an analyst. Analysts don't fight. They create conditions where fighting isn't necessary. On the 4th day, Tobias brought news. Derek Fall had struck a deal with the smugglers. He'd be smuggling a shipment of salt across the swamp. In 3 days, at night, on a cart, alone. No partners. He doesn't want to share. Salt is expensive in Onwald. Smuggling salt through Topi means quick money, and a death sentence if caught. But that didn't scare Derek. He'd just slaughtered an entire baron's household and received a sack of gold for it. Salt is small change. Hayden smiled. For the first time in 2 weeks. A wagon, night, a swamp, alone. He knew every inch of the trail from the drylands to the first ford across the Topi. The map showed everything. The trail ran along a channel. At one point, it turned sharply to the left. There was a cliff there, 1.5 meters, black water below, deep. The bottom was muddy. A wagon loaded with salt would sink to the bottom in a minute. If a wheel slipped, if the horse jerked in the wrong direction, if something startled the horse at the wrong moment. Hayden reached that spot at dawn. He surveyed the turn. The map highlighted the cracks. The right edge of the trail had been washed away. The ground was barely holding on. All it would take was removing one stone. Just one. The one propping up the edge from the inside. Without it, the trail would give way under the weight of the cart. Not immediately, a second later, when the rear wheel rolls over the weakened edge. Hayden removed the stone. He covered his tracks. He sprinkled clay and leaves over the spot. Impossible to spot, even in broad daylight, and at night, certainly. Then he prepared the second element, a marsh toad, a large one, about the size of 2 palms. He caught it in the stream, put it in a cloth bag. The toad was croaking, low, loud, hoarse, a sound that would make any horse nervous. 3 days later, at night, Hayden lay in the reeds 20 paces from the bend. He waited. Patience, a scout's greatest weapon. At midnight, he heard the creak of wheels, a wagon, 1 horse, heavily loaded. Hayden saw Derek fall in the driver's seat. He was sober. He hadn't been drinking for this job. Alert. But a man's attention is limited. He was looking straight ahead, at the trail, not down, not at the edge. The wagon was approaching the bend. Hayden untied the sack and flung the toad onto the trail. The toad landed 3 paces in front of the horse and let out a shriek. The horse jerked to the right, toward the edge. The wagon swayed. The rear wheel rolled onto a weakened spot. The ground gave way. Slowly, as if in a dream, the wheel sank down. The wagon tilted. Derek yanked the reins to the left. Too late. The wagon tipped over the edge. Salt, a tree, the horse, a man. Everything crashed into the black water. A splash, the horse's cry, brief, then a gurgling sound, then silence. Hayden lay in the reeds and counted. 1 minute, 2, 3. In the 4th minute, a head emerged from the water. Derek Fall. He was clutching at the roots on the bank, struggling to pull himself up. His left leg wouldn't work. A limp. In the water, that's a death sentence. He clung to a root and tried to pull himself up with one hand. His right hand, burned, couldn't hold on. Hayden watched. He didn't move. Derek slipped. He went under. He surfaced. He grabbed hold again. He slipped again. The salt in the wagon was dissolving and pulling everything to the bottom. The horse had stopped struggling. The 3rd time, Derek didn't resurface. Hayden waited another 5 minutes, then 10. No one appeared. He stood up, walked to the edge, looked down. Black water. He couldn't see a thing. He stood there, waiting to feel something. Satisfaction, relief, justice. He felt nothing. Only that same cold clarity. 1 dot erased from the map. There was still a lot left to do. He leveled the spot where he'd removed the stone. He found a similar cobblestone and put it back in place. In the morning, when the smugglers came looking for their salt, they'd find a washed-out turn, damp weather, a wagon at the bottom of the channel, a drunken mercenary who'd lost control, an accident. No one would investigate. No one will seek revenge. Derek Fall isn't the kind of person people avenge. Hayden returned to the mill at dawn. Ira hadn't been sleeping. She was sitting by the hearth. She looked at him, at his wet clothes, at his hands. She didn't ask anything. Hayden sat down beside her. He was silent for a moment. Then he said that the first debt had been settled. Ira nodded. She poured him some dried mint tea, hot, bitter. Hayden drank and felt the warmth spread down into his stomach. His hands stopped trembling. He hadn't realized they'd been trembling. For the next 2 weeks, he worked. He expanded the map. He reinforced the mill. Garan forged. Slowly. Stubbornly. 1 knife every 2 days. Then 1 a day. The knives were rough, but sharp. Hayden began hiding them. In hiding places along the trails. In tree hollows. Under rocks by the fords. Now there was a hidden knife lying on every safe path. If any of his men had to run, he wouldn't have to run unarmed. He had 3 men so far, but Hayden was thinking ahead. He always thought ahead. In the 3rd week after Derek's death, new people arrived in Topi. 2 of them, a man and a woman. The man was a former soldier. His left arm had been severed at the elbow. He'd been discharged from the army as a cripple. The woman was his wife, pregnant, 7 months along. They were standing knee-deep in water at the edge of the swamp, not knowing where to go. Tobias brought them there. He said there was a man in the swamp who could help. Hayden went out to meet them. He looked at the one-armed soldier, at his wife, at her belly. Karta took them both in. The soldier, a veteran, standing straight even without an arm. His eyes were calm. He wasn't afraid. His wife, exhausted to the limit, but walking on her own, not complaining. Hayden led them to the mill. Eira examined the woman. She said the baby was healthy, that the birth was 2 months away, that she needed warmth and food. Goran silently pulled a stool over for the soldier. The soldier sat down. He looked at Hayden. He asked who he was. Hayden replied that he was a man who lived there. The soldier asked what he wanted in return. Hayden said nothing. For now. The soldier smirked. He said that nothing comes for free except in fairy tales. Hayden shrugged. He said that maybe this was a fairy tale. The soldier said nothing. 3 days later, he was already helping Goran at the anvil. With one hand, he held the workpiece with tongs while Goran hammered. They found their rhythm. Slowly. Clumsily. But they found it. The mill was getting cramped. 5 people. Soon to be 6. Hayden looked at the map in his head. It already covered a day's journey's worth of territory. Dozens of trails. Hundreds of mounds. 3 safe fords. 2 dangerous sections with quicksand. One spot in the south where the map showed something strange. A dense cluster. Bright. Brighter than the wagon load of tools. Brighter than anything he'd ever seen. Something big and old. Deep underwater. Hayden marked it on the map and left it for now. Not the time. People first, secrets later. By the end of the month, there were 7 of them. After the soldier and his wife, a boy of about 16 arrived. A thief, caught stealing bread. He'd been on the run to avoid the noose. Then an old woman with her granddaughter. The old woman had been driven out by her own son. He took the house, he took the land. He sent his mother away to die. The granddaughter is 4 years old. She doesn't say a word. She stares with huge eyes and remains silent. The map read each one. Every new person is a new thread, a new point on the map, a new story. Every story is similar to the others. Killed, driven out, taken away, erased. The Tupi accept everyone. Hayden stood on the roof of the mill and looked south. Fog stretched to the horizon. Somewhere out there were ancient ruins, submerged cities. 1,000 years ago, there had been an empire here. Now, it was a swamp. The map showed that bright cluster in the south and pulsed quietly, as if it were calling. Hayden turned away. Not now. The first month in the marshes was over. 7 people, 1 mill, 1 blacksmith, 1 herbalist, 1 dead mercenary at the bottom of the channel, and a map that grew with each passing day. It was a beginning. Small, fragile, but a beginning. The second month began with rain. It rained non-stop for 4 days. The swamp swelled. The water crept up to the mill's threshold. Hayden watched the water level rise and did the math. If the rain didn't stop by tomorrow morning, the water would flood the floor. He needed a dam, or a new drainage channel. He went out into the rain and walked around the mill. The map worked even in the downpour. It showed where the water was flowing, where the main current was coming from. The eastern channel had spread out, and some of the water was flowing straight onto the islet. Hayden found the spot, a narrow isthmus between the 2 channels. If he dug a half-meter deep trench, the water would flow into the southern channel and bypass the mill. 2 hours of work, maybe 3. He picked up the shovel that Goran had forged from a piece of the mill's broken mechanism and began digging. An hour later, a 1-armed soldier came out to him. His name was Renard. He stood beside him. He looked at the ditch. He got the idea. He took the second shovel. He dug with 1 hand. Slowly, but he dug. By noon, the ditch was ready. The water began to flow around the mill. The water level at the mill started to drop. Renard looked at Hayden, soaked to the skin, dirty, with a shovel in his only hand. He said that for a nobleman, Hayden dug pretty well. Hayden replied that he wasn't a nobleman. Renard smirked. He said that while his boots might have come from a dead man, his hands held the shovel like someone who'd never dug before. Hayden didn't argue. Renard was observant. A former soldier, he was used to noticing things. On the 5th day, the rain stopped. The water receded. But Hayden realized that the mill wouldn't survive the winter if there were another downpour like that. The floor needed to be raised. A second drainage line was needed. Supplies were needed. Lots of supplies. Winter in the marshes meant 3 months when the swamp froze over and it was impossible to fish or forage. He sat by the hearth that evening and did the math. 7 people, soon to be 8 when Renard's wife gives birth. 3 months of winter. At a minimum, that's 400 kilograms of food. Dried fish, jerky, roots, berries, salt for preservation. They didn't have even a tenth of that. Hayden began hunting. Not with a sword, with traps. The map showed animal trails, where the marsh deer roamed, where the otters lived, where fish rise to the surface in warm channels. He set snares made of rope and traps made of stones. The first 3 days yielded nothing. On the 4th day, he caught 2 large fish in a woven basket lowered into a channel. On the 6th day, a young deer was caught in a snare. Small, skinny, but it's meat. Hayden butchered it. Era salted the meat with what little salt they had. She hung it over the hearth to dry. The mill smelled of smoke and meat. Warmth. For the first time in 2 months, it felt like home. In the second week of the second month, Tobias brought news. Bad news. People from Westmar had appeared in the village. 10 of them, armed. They say they've come to clear the swamp of vagrants. The local steward told them that someone lives in the marshes, that they'd seen smoke. Hayden listened. The map in his head was already at work. 10 mercenaries. Where were they staying? Which route would they take? When would they enter the swamp? Tobias said they planned to enter in 3 days, via the northern ford, the very same one Hayden had used to reach the drylands. 3 days. Hayden nodded. He let Tobias go. He sat on the roof of the mill and thought. 10 armed mercenaries aren't just 2 crossbowmen. They're a squad, experienced, armed, swords, crossbows, maybe spears. Against them are 7 men, of whom only Renard can actually fight, and even then, with only one hand. Direct combat wasn't an option. Hayden closed his eyes. A map unfolded in his mind. The entire territory he'd covered over the past 2 months. Every trail, every ford, every quagmire, every spot where the ground looks solid but actually gives way under a person's weight. He wouldn't fight them. He'd let the swamp do it for him. He'd spent 2 days preparing. He went out to the northern ford, the one the mercenaries would use to enter the marshes. The ford was safe, but 200 paces south of it, there's another crossing. It looks like a ford. The water's knee-deep, the bottom seems solid, but the map showed that beneath a thin layer of clay, there's peat. Liquid. Bottomless. A person will sink waist-deep in 3 seconds, chest-deep in 10. In a minute, only an arm will remain above the surface. Hayden did 2 things. First, he blocked off the real ford. He dragged 3 fallen trees and knocked them down across the path. He camouflaged them with branches. It looks like a natural windfall. Impassable. The squad will see the blockage and go looking for a detour. Second, he laid a false trail from the blockage to the false ford. Broken branches, trampled grass, footprints, as if someone had walked this path. Everything leads to that spot where there's peat and death, but not directly. Hayden was smarter than that. A straight false trail is a trap that an experienced commander would see through. That's why the trail meandered. It didn't lead to the false ford, but past it, but in such a way that the false ford ended up on the right as you moved along, visible but not in the way. The commander will decide that the trail leads further on, and when the trail hits an impassable wall of mangrove thickets, he'll look back. He'll see what looks like a convenient detour. Water up to his knees. And he'll go that way, not along the false trail, but by his own decision. That's important. People don't trust hints from others. They trust what they've found themselves. Hayden checked everything twice. He retreated and covered his tracks. He returned to the mill. He told Renard that they would have guests in a day. Renard nodded. He didn't ask how he knew. He was already used to Hayden knowing. Hayden ordered everyone to stay quiet, not to light a fire, not to leave the mill, not to make a sound. Just 1 day. They could do it. The mercenaries arrived on the 3rd day, just as Tobias had promised. 10 men. Hayden lay on the roof of the mill, wrapped in marsh duckweed, and watched. The map showed them as red dots on the northern edge. They found the barricade at the ford. They paused. The commander cursed. Hayden couldn't hear the words, but he saw the silhouettes moving. Frustration. A delay. The commander sent 2 men to scout ahead. They found a false trail. They returned. They reported. The squad moved along the trail. Hayden counted his steps. His pulse was steady. His breathing was calm. They reached a dead end, a wall of mangroves, impassable. The commander stopped. He looked back and saw the false ford. Knee-deep water, smooth, calm, inviting. The commander paused. He thought. He sent 1 man ahead to check it out. Hayden had been expecting this. He knew that an experienced commander wouldn't go first. He'd send a scout. That's why the trap wasn't set for the first person. The first 3 steps across the false ford were indeed safe. A thin layer of clay on the surface of the peat could support 1 person if they walked slowly. The scout took 3 steps. The bottom held. He waved his hand. All clear. The commander led the squad. 8 men entered the water, in a wide formation, shoulder to shoulder. That's how experienced soldiers march, and that's what killed them. 1 person equals 60 to 70 kilograms per point of contact. 8 men side by side meant 500 kilograms over an area of 10 steps. The peat couldn't hold. It gave way all at once, under all 8 of them, like a trap door. One moment they were standing knee-deep in water, the next the water was chest-deep, and rising. Screams. Swords were useless, the crossbows were soaked, their hands grasped at water and mud, nothing to hold on to, no bottom. Just liquid peat pulling them down, 8 out of 10, in a minute. The commander stood on the solid bank. The scout stood at the far end of the false ford, from where he'd managed to leap back, 2 out of 10. The commander watched as his men drowned. There was nothing he could do. He couldn't throw a rope. He couldn't reach out a hand. 10 steps of liquid peat separated him from the nearest drowning man. 2 minutes later, it was all over. 8 men had gone under, quietly. The swamp makes no sound when it kills. The commander and the scout stood and stared at the smooth black surface. Not a bubble, not a sound, as if nothing had happened. They left, quickly, almost at a run, northward, toward dry land. Hayden lay on the roof of the mill and counted. 10 came, 2 went, 8 at the bottom. Not a single blow, not a single shot. He climbed down from the roof. His hands were shaking again, just like after Derek Fall. 8 people, alive, who were now dead, because he'd moved 3 logs and trampled a false trail. Hayden sat down by the cold hearth. Ira was watching him. Renard was watching. Garan stood in the doorway with a hammer in his hand. Everyone was waiting. Hayden said it was all over, that they'd left, that they wouldn't be back, not now. But they'll come back later, and there'll be more of them. Renard asked how many there had been. Hayden replied that there were 10. Renard asked how many had left. Hayden replied that 2 had left. Renard looked at him very intently. He asked how. Hayden replied, "The swamp." Renard nodded. He was silent for a moment. Then he said that he'd once served at a garrison on the southern border. He'd seen officers plan ambushes. None of them could have drowned 8 men without drawing their weapons. Hayden didn't answer. Renard didn't press the issue. But from that day on, he began to see Hayden differently. Not as a noble young man hiding in the swamp, but as a man worth following. That night, Hayden lay awake. The map pulsed, demanding his attention. 8 new dead spots on it. 8 people he knew nothing about. Each had a name, a family. Someone was waiting for them at home. Hayden closed his eyes. In the war, he'd seen reports, numbers, enemy casualties, so many. Friendly casualties, so many. Back then, they were just numbers. Now they were red dots that had gone out. He knew he couldn't afford to think about it. Not because he didn't care, because if he started thinking, he wouldn't be able to stop. And he needed to think about something else, about the fact that 2 had returned to the drylands, about what they would tell, about what would come next. The Westmars now knew that there was someone in the marshes, not a vagrant, not a gang, someone who could kill a dozen without being seen. That would attract attention. That would change everything. Hayden opened his eyes and stared into the darkness. The next move is theirs. As for his move, it began 3 weeks ago, when he planted the first seed in young Tobias's mind, when he forged the first knife with Goran, when Ira first called him by his name instead of kid. His move isn't about traps or quicksand. His move is about people. Every new person in the mill is a brick in a wall that can't be drowned in the swamp, and Hayden will lay those bricks one by one until the wall is high enough to live behind. The 2 surviving mercenaries returned to Westmar. Hayden knew this because Tobias brought the news a week later. The village is quiet, too quiet. The steward has stopped going outside. Patrols along the swamp had doubled, but no one ventured into Topi anymore. They were afraid. Hayden took advantage of this lull. Every day without an enemy was a day for building. The mill had become too cramped for the 8 of them. Renard Oda's wife was having trouble walking. Her belly was already enormous. She was due in 3 weeks, maybe sooner. Aira said she needed a separate place, warm, clean, and draft-free. Hayden found it. 100 paces from the mill, on the same little island, stood a stone cellar, old, buried in the ground. The roof had caved in, but the walls were intact, thick. He patched up the roof in 2 days. Poles, turf, reeds. It wasn't pretty, but it was dry. Garan built a small hearth in the corner. Aira hung up some herbs. It turned into something resembling a room. Oda went inside. She sat down on a bed of moss that Hayden had stuffed with dry grass. She looked around, then at Hayden. She said that her house back in the village had been worse. It wasn't a joke. It was the truth. And that truth made Hayden feel a chill inside. The people he'd gathered around him lived in worse conditions than he could have imagined. The mill in the swamp seemed like a luxury to them. 2 weeks later, Oda gave birth. A boy, small, red. He screamed so loudly that the marsh birds scattered from the nearby trees. Ada delivered the baby. Her hands were covered in blood. Her face was focused. Her left burned hand worked just as well as her right. The pain didn't matter when a new life lay in her palms. Renard stood by the door. He listened to his wife's screams and said nothing. Hayden stood next to him. He was silent too. When the baby let out its first cry, Renard exhaled. Long, heavy, like a man who had been holding his breath for a very long time. Then he turned to Hayden. He said the boy would be named Aiden. Hayden nodded. A good name. Renard said something else, quietly, so that only Hayden could hear. He said that now he had something to fight for, that before he'd just been surviving, but now he had something to protect, and that if Hayden needed a soldier, he'd found one. Hayden looked at him, at the one-armed former soldier standing in the doorway of a stone cellar in the middle of a swamp, looking alive for the first time in a long time. A bond stretched between them, a strong one, a real one. Not the kind built on fear or self-interest, the kind built on one person giving another a place where his child could be born in warmth. This thread would last for years. Meanwhile, Hayden never stopped exploring. Every day he set out in a new direction. The map kept expanding. By the end of the second month, it covered an area 2 days' journey across. And the farther he went, the more he saw. The marshes weren't empty. People lived there, scattered, lonely, small groups of 2 or 3 people, hiding in reed huts, fishing, gathering roots, dying from the cold and disease. Hayden didn't approach them. Not yet. He marked them on the map, memorized them, counted them. South of the mill, a day's journey away, he discovered something more. Ruins. Ancient. Stone walls jutting out of the water. Arches covered in moss. The remains of a paved road disappearing beneath the water. These were the ruins of that very empire that had perished 1,000 years ago. The map pulsed as he approached them. That bright node to the south was somewhere here, close by, underwater, deep. Hayden stood knee-deep in the water amid the debris of a stone colonnade and felt the map pulling him down, like a magnet, strongly, insistently. He took a step, then another. The water was waist-deep, up to his chest. The map was on fire. The lines radiated in all directions. There was something beneath him, something enormous. He could sense its contours, corridors, halls, staircases. Everything was flooded. Everything was underwater, but intact. Untouched for 1,000 years. Archive. The word came to him on its own. He didn't know where it came from, but he knew it was right. Archive. Hayden stepped back. He got out of the water. He sat down on a rock and realized his nose was bleeding, profusely, red drops on the gray rock. His head was splitting. The map had overloaded. Too much information in a single touch. He sat and waited for it to pass. 20 minutes. Then he stood up. He walked back. Back to the people, back to the mill, back to the living. The archive could wait. He wasn't ready. Not yet, anyway. On the way back, he met her. A woman in her 30s, tall, a long dark braid, a calm face. Too calm for someone standing alone in the middle of a swamp. She was standing on the path, waiting for him. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't running away. She was waiting. The map flashed. It assessed her instantly. Military bearing, feet shoulder-width apart, weight on the balls of her feet, ready to move in any direction. A knife on her belt. A good one, not rusty. The steel gleams. A well-maintained weapon. Her hands are calm, accustomed to a weapon. But now they're empty. Open palms. A gesture of peace. Or the gesture of someone who's certain they won't need the knife. Hayden stopped 10 paces away. They looked at each other. She spoke first. She said she'd been following him for 3 days. That she'd seen him lead people along trails that aren't on any maps, how he sets traps, how he read tracks. She said she wanted to know who he was. Hayden replied with a question. He asked who she was. The woman paused. Then she gave her name. Maria Ashford, a former Crown intelligence agent. Hayden didn't move. The map pulsed. A Crown intelligence agent, here, in the marshes. It could have been a trap. He asked why former. Maria didn't answer right away. She said she'd worked for the Crown for 6 years. She gathered information on minor houses, their weaknesses, debts, skeletons in the closet. Then, that information was used to destroy those houses. Land was bought up. Families were wiped out. She was a tool. When she realized this, she left. She defected. They're looking for her. The bounty on her head is 20 gold marks. Hayden listened. The map verified every word. Not the truth itself, the map doesn't read minds, but the map read her body, her pulse, her neck, eye movements, the position of her hands. Maria wasn't lying, or she was lying so well that her body didn't give her away. And that, in itself, was information. Hayden asked why she had come to him. Maria said she'd been in the swamps for 3 months, surviving, but not really living. She'd heard about a man who gathers people, who knows the trails, who had drowned 10 mercenaries without delivering the weapons. She said she wanted to be useful. Hayden was silent. He was thinking. A royal scout is both a gift and a threat. If she's the real deal, she knows how the system works. She knows the people. She knows the methods. That's priceless. If she's a plant, she knows how to destroy everything he's building from the inside. He made a decision. He told her she could go with him, but not to the mill. Not yet. He'll put her up separately, in Era's old cabin, an hour's walk from the camp. She would live there. He would come by, talk to her, check on her. When the map told him it was enough, he would decide. Maria nodded. No hard feelings, no surprise. She would have done the same in his place, and they both knew it. Hayden led her to the cabin, left some food, a knife, a blanket, then he left. On the way back, he thought, Maria Ashford, a royal intelligence agent. She knows how small clans are broken. She knows from the inside. If she's honest, she's the most valuable person he could have found in these swamps. More valuable than a blacksmith, more valuable than a herbalist, more valuable than a soldier. Because she knows the enemy not from the outside, but from the inside. Hayden visited her every day. They talked for hours. He asked questions. She answered. About the structure of royal intelligence, about the chains of command, about how orders are relayed, how agents are recruited, how documents are forged, how debts are fabricated to seize land. Each answer added a new layer to the map. Within a week, Hayden knew more about the inner workings of Ainwald than he had learned in 2 months of his own intelligence work. And the map began to change shape. Before, it had been a topographical map. Trails, fords, hiding places. Now a second layer had appeared on it. People, connections, money, power. Who pays whom? Who fears whom? Through whom orders flow. A web, delicate, complex. And at the center of this web sat the Westmar house. And next to it, a shadow. Someone in the capital. Someone at the chancellery level or higher. The one who struck the name Orwell from the family register overnight. Maria didn't know exactly who, but she knew that such decisions were made only with the Lord Chancellor's approval. Hayden remembered. 10 days later, he brought Maria to the mill. The map said enough. Not everything, but enough to take the risk. Era looked at Maria. Maria looked at Era. 2 women who both knew what it was like to be a tool in the hands of others. Era held out a mug of herbal tea to her. Maria accepted it. It was a handshake. The 3rd month in the marshes. Winter had come. Not all at once, slowly, like an illness that starts as just a cough and then turns into a fever. The temperature dropped every day. The fog grew thicker, denser. Sometimes Hayden couldn't see his own hands stretched out in front of him, but the map could see. The map didn't depend on eyes. It relied on steps and memory. The first ice appeared on the channels at the start of the 3rd week. Thin, fragile. Step on it and you'd fall through. Era had warned them about this, the most dangerous time. The ice looks like solid ground, but it's deceptive. Hayden forbade anyone from leaving the islet without his permission. There were now 12 people. After Maria, 3 more had arrived. An old clerk from a ruined barony. He'd been driven out when the new lord brought in his own people. The clerk was literate. He knew 3 languages. He knew how to draw up documents. Hayden seated him next to Annalise. No, Annalise hasn't come yet. He put the clerk in charge of keeping track of everything. How much food, how much firewood, how much water, and how many days until supplies ran out. The clerk's name was Eldrick. He wore glasses with a cracked lens and was constantly wiping them with the hem of his shirt. The other 2 were brothers, young men, peasants, who had fled the village of Westmar after the steward had taken their sister as payment for a debt. Their sister was taken to the manor. The brothers went into the swamp. They were angry, silent, thirsty for blood. Hayden gave them axes, told them to chop wood, lots of wood, to pour all their anger into the wood. They chopped for 3 days. Then they calmed down. Then they began to listen. Winter was testing everyone. The cold seeped into their bones. The mill was heated, but the walls were stone, and the stone drew the cold up from the ground. People huddled around the hearth. They slept 3 or 4 to a blanket. Renard's child cried at night. Oda rocked him and sang softly, low, a song without words. Hayden listened and didn't sleep. He didn't sleep much. The map wouldn't let him. It demanded work. Every night, when everyone else fell asleep, he lay with his eyes closed, piecing together in his mind everything he had learned that day. Trails, faces, words, the threads connecting people, connecting events, connecting what was said and what was left unsaid. It was like gathering intelligence from a hot zone, only instead of satellite images, he had a live stream of data from every step he took, and that stream never stopped. The map devoured his sleep. It devoured his appetite. After a particularly intense day, when he received a lot of new data from Tobias or Maria, he'd lie flat on his back. His head would split open. Blood would run from his nose. The map would shrink to the radius of an outstretched arm. He'd become blind and helpless. Then it would let up. After a day, sometimes after 2, and the map would unfold again, brighter, wider, more detailed. Maria noticed. She noticed everything, really. In the 4th week of winter, she came to see him in the morning as he lay there after another bout of exhaustion, pale, with dried blood under his nose. She sat down beside him. She didn't ask anything. She just sat there. Then she said she'd known a man in the Royal Intelligence Service. He could memorize everything he saw, every face, every document, every number. After 3 years, he stopped sleeping. After 5, he started talking to himself. After 7, they found him in his office. He'd carved names into the walls with his fingernails. Maria didn't ask what was happening to Hayden. She just told the story and looked him in the eyes. Hayden understood. She sees. Not the map, not the ability, but she sees the cost, and she's warning him. He nodded.
Said he'd be more careful. Maria smirked. Said that people who say they'll be more careful are usually lying. Hayden didn't reply, because she was right. Winter dragged on. Supplies were dwindling. Hayden counted every piece of jerky, every handful of dried berries, every fish pulled from under the ice. Eldrick kept track. The numbers offered no comfort. By midwinter, their supplies would last only 3 weeks. Winter would last another 6. Hayden made a decision, a risky one. He would go to the dry lands. Not to Tobias, further on, to the inns along the northern highway. There was food there. He wasn't going to steal, he was going to trade. Swamp iron. Garan had forged 18 knives in 2 months. Rough, black, ugly, but sharp. In the dry lands, a good knife is worth 3 silver marks. 18 knives is 54 marks. That's enough for flour, salt, groats, maybe blankets. Maria said it was madness, that they were looking for him, that the Westmars had put a bounty on anyone from the marshes. Hayden replied that they weren't looking for him. They were looking for the marsh leader, the ghost, and he would make his way to the highway as a wandering knife peddler. No one would connect a filthy peddler with the man who drowned 10 mercenaries. He left at dawn with a sack of knives on his back. The map guided him along safe trails, across the ice, through frozen channels, past the quagmires that never froze, even in winter. By noon, he emerged onto dry land for the first time in 3 months. Solid ground beneath his feet. A road, people, carts, horses, the smell of smoke from chimneys, bread, manure, life. Hayden pulled his hood tight. He lowered his head. He became smaller, quieter, less conspicuous. On Earth, he'd been trained to conduct surveillance in urban environments, to blend into the crowd, not to stand out. There was no crowd here, but the principle was the same. Be who they expect to see. On the highway, they expect to see a traveling merchant, dirty, tired, carrying a sack of cheap goods. Hayden entered the tavern at the crossroads. Small, dirty. 3 tables, a bar made of unplaned planks. Behind the bar, a fat, red-faced owner. 2 girls were serving beer. It smelled of sour cabbage and spilled ale. Hayden sat in a corner. He ordered a bowl of soup. He paid with a copper coin he'd taken from one of the crossbowmen on the first day. While he ate, the card player said she was taking in the room. The innkeeper, left-handed, a former soldier, a tattoo on his wrist, the insignia of a sapper regiment. He'd been discharged long ago. He has a prosthetic leg, wood and leather. The girls, sisters, they look alike. The younger one is afraid of the older one. The older one is afraid of the innkeeper. 3 peasants at the far table, drunk, not dangerous. 1 merchant by the door, a horseman,
Nice clothes. Road dust. He's traveling from south to north. He was carrying something heavy. The horse is loaded down. A leather bag at his feet. He's guarding it. Money or valuable goods. Hayden didn't bother him. That wasn't why he'd come. He waited until the innkeeper was free. He walked up to the bar. He took 3 knives out of the bag. He laid them on the counter. He said he was selling them. Marsh steel. Sharp. Cheap. The innkeeper picked one up. He turned it over in his hand, tested the blade with his fingernail. He grunted, said it was rough work, but the steel was good. He asked how much. Hayden named his price. 2 marks apiece. The shopkeeper haggled. Hayden dropped the price to 1.5. The shopkeeper took 3, 4.5 marks in silver. Then he looked at Hayden more closely. He asked where the goods came from. Hayden said from a blacksmith in the southern farmsteads. The innkeeper nodded. He didn't believe him, but didn't press the matter. At an inn along the highway, you don't ask unnecessary questions. It's a law of survival. By evening, Hayden had sold 12 knives, 4 at the inn, the rest along the road, to peasants, merchants, and a deserter. 31 silver marks. He bought flour, salt, and grains, 2 blankets, a coil of rope, a leather bag, candles, a needle, and thread. Ara had asked for it. He loaded everything onto his back. It was heavy, 40 kilograms. His back was bent double, but Hayden carried on. By nightfall, he was back in Tapie. By dawn, he was at the mill. When Ara saw the flour, she said nothing. She just stood there, staring at the sack. Then she crouched down. She opened it. She plunged her hand into the white, loose flour. She held a handful. She poured it back in. Then she stood up and went to her room. An hour later, she returned with flatbreads, hot, made with water and flour. No oil, no salt. Flat, gray rounds. Everyone ate in silence. Goran chewed and stared at the wall. Renard fed Oda, who fed Aiden. The peasant brothers ate standing up. Eldrick wiped his glasses. Maria sat by the wall and ate slowly, like someone who appreciates every bite. Hayden ate and thought about the trading posts, about trade, about how to turn swamp iron from raw material into a commodity, and that commodity into food, clothing, and tools. The mill is a shelter, but a shelter doesn't feed you. You need a system. You need trade. You need a steady channel to the drylands, not just a boy with news. A trading post, a point of exchange, a place where the marsh and the dry land meet. He began to make plans. Winter ended just as it had begun, slowly. The ice on the waterways thinned. It darkened. It became porous. Then it crumbled. The water flowed again. The fog thinned. The sun occasionally broke through it, dim and cold, but the sun nonetheless. Hayden stood on the roof of the mill and looked out at his world. An island, stone walls, smoke from the chimney, the sound of the hammer, Goran at work, a child crying, Aiden, voices, people, his people. 12 people who had survived the winter. All alive. He hadn't lost a single one. It had seemed impossible 3 months ago. The map now covered a vast territory. He could sense every trail within a day's journey of the mill, every ford, every shelter. And something else. Over the winter, he had carefully scouted the surroundings. He discovered that more people lived in the marshes than he'd thought. Far more. His map counted 47 people within a 2-day radius. Solitaries, couples, small families, all in hiding, all afraid, all starving. With the arrival of spring, Hayden sprang into action. Not all at once, step by step, just like on Earth when he was setting up a reconnaissance network in an unfamiliar region. First contact, building trust, offering something of value, bringing them into the network. He began visiting the nearest campsites, alone, unarmed. He brought food with him, a knife, a coil of rope, something useful, not a gift, an exchange. He'd offer a knife and ask about trails to the south. He'd offer a rope and ask where the fish were. He'd offer a handful of salt and ask what they'd heard about other people in the marshes. Not an interrogation, a conversation, an ordinary human conversation in which every word was plotted on a map. In 3 weeks, he visited 11 camps. He met 26 people. Each one became a point on the map. Threads stretched between the points. The web grew. Hayden learned that a swamp clan lived to the south, a small one, about 30 people. They had been here before all the exiles. Native swamp dwellers, born in the marshes. They lived by hunting and fishing. They had no contact with the people of the drylands. They trust no one. Hayden marked them on the map, but didn't go to them. It was too soon. In the 4th week of spring, new people arrived at the mill, not from the swamp, from the drylands, a woman and a boy. Hayden saw them on the northern trail half an hour before they arrived. The map showed 2 silhouettes, one adult, one small. They were walking slowly, staggering, tired. The woman was young, 22, maybe 23, dark-haired. Her back was straight despite her fatigue. Her clothes were nice but worn. The fabric was expensive. The cut was urban, not a peasant. The boy was about 10 years old, thin, light hair. He was holding his sister's hand, not his mother's. Carta noticed. The age difference was too small for mother and son, sister and brother. Hayden stepped out to meet them. The woman saw him and stopped. She straightened up even more, chin up, a habit, aristocratic, automatic. Even covered in mud and exhausted, her body remembered her poise. She introduced herself, Annalise Kane, daughter of Victor Kane of the Kane Trading House. Hayden knew that name. The memory of the former Hayden reminded him. The Kane family, merchants, not nobles, but wealthy. They used to be wealthy. Annalise said her father had been imprisoned for debts, forged, fabricated, by someone from the great houses. She didn't know who. Their property had been confiscated, the house sold. Her mother had died 2 years ago. Her younger brother, Lucas, was her only family. They'd been walking toward the swamp for 3 days. They slept in ditches. They ate whatever they found in the fields. She said this matter-of-factly, without tears, without complaint, factually, as if she were reading a report. The map read her, educated, confident, used to being in charge, used to being useful. Beneath her even voice lay such intense exhaustion that one more day and she would simply collapse. The boy, Lucas, pressed himself against his sister and looked at Hayden in silence. His eyes were gray, attentive, not childlike. Children who've seen their father taken away and their home burned down grow up fast. Hayden led them to the mill. Era fed them. She gave them something hot. The boy ate greedily. Annalise ate slowly. She was in control of herself, even when hungry, even on the brink. She was in control of herself. Hayden looked at her and thought. A trading house, bookkeeping, languages, literacy, a person who knows how to run a business. Exactly what he needed. 2 days later, he spoke to her about the trading post. Annalise listened. She didn't interrupt. When he finished, she asked 3 questions. What was the volume of goods? Through which channels were they sold? Who controls the prices of marsh iron in the neighboring baronies? Hayden answered the first 2. He couldn't answer the third. He didn't know. Annalise said that without an answer to the third question, the trading post would be operating blindly, that iron prices depend on shipments from the north. If the northern mines produced enough, no one would need swamp iron. But if the northern route were cut off, or if there were delays there, then swamp iron would become the only source, and the price would triple. Hayden looked at her. She spoke of Ainwald's trade flows with the same confidence with which he spoke of the trails in the swamp. Everyone knows their own territory. He offered her the chance to run the trading post, not just to keep the books, to run it. Her name, her rules, her people. Annalise fell silent for a long time. Then she asked why he was doing this. Hayden didn't understand the question. She explained. Her whole life she'd been used. Her father used her as his clever daughter in negotiations. Her mother had used her as a homemaker. Suitors had used her as a good match. She was used to every offer coming with a price. Hayden replied that there was a price, that he needed a trading post that worked, and that he didn't know anyone who could handle it better than her. Annalise looked at him. The card was reading. Her pulse quickened. Her eyes widened slightly. Not out of fear, surprise. Genuine surprise. For the first time in her life, she'd been offered the chance not to be useful to someone else, but to do her own thing. She nodded. She said she needed a week to study the routes, the prices, the channels. Then she'd say where to set up the trading post and how to organize it. Hayden agreed. A week later, Annalise came to him with a plan, written on birch bark with charcoal, 3 columns: expenses, income, risks. She'd found a spot for the trading post, the border between the swamps and the drylands, an old fishing pier, abandoned for 20 years, far from the Westmar patrols, near a trail used by smugglers, the perfect spot. Hayden looked at the plan, then at Annalise, then back at the plan. He said she'd forgotten one line in the expenses: security. Annalise looked up. Their eyes met. She said she hadn't forgotten, that security was his business and trade was hers, and that if he meddled in her columns, she'd meddle in his map. For the first time in a long while, Hayden almost smiled. He nodded. Division of labor. She trades, he protects. Her first real partner, not a subordinate, not an ally, a partner. They set up the trading post in 2 weeks. Renard and the peasant brothers rebuilt the pier. Goran forged the door hinges. Era sourced the goods, herbs, ointments, tinctures, things that fetch a good price in the drylands. Annalise, the first business contacts. Through Tobias, she found two merchants who agreed to come to the dock once a week. Marsh iron and medicinal herbs went to them. Flour, salt, and cloth came back. A thin thread of trade, fragile but alive. By the end of the third month, the mill had 14 residents. The trading post was turning a profit. Goran was forging, Aero was healing, Maria was training the peasant brothers in the use of weapons, Annalise was counting the money, Renard was standing guard, Eldrick was keeping records. Hayden stood at the center of it all and felt the threads of the map tightening, strengthening, intertwining. It wasn't a system yet, but it was no longer a coincidence. The fourth month, half a year in the marshes. Hayden stood on the roof of the mill and looked toward the southwest. There, beyond the fog, lay the Swamp Clan, 30 people who had lived in the marshes long before any of the exiles. He knew of them from snippets of conversation with other swamp folk.
The clan had no contact with anyone. They didn't trade. They didn't ask for help. They kept to themselves. They had their own trails, their own laws, their own territory. The map showed their encampment as a faint spot to the south. Faint because Hayden had never been there. A map needs footsteps. Without footsteps, there's only the echo of others' words. He decided to go. Maria tried to talk him out of it. She said that the swamp clans didn't like strangers, that there had been cases where newcomers were found tied to trees, alive, but without tongues. Hayden listened. He set out. The map led him along trails he already knew. Then the trails ended. Unfamiliar territory began. Every step was new. Every bump was unfamiliar. The map eagerly absorbed it all. He walked all day. By evening, the landscape had changed. The mangrove trees grew taller, denser. The roots intertwined over the water, creating something like bridges. The air smelled different, not like peat, but like something alive and green, like fish and smoke. They found him before he found them. 3 people emerged from behind the trees, silently. The map hadn't warned him. They were so quiet that even the map hadn't had time to register them. 2 men and a girl. All 3 were barefoot. Their skin was tanned to a bronze hue. Their clothes were made of animal hides and marsh flax. The men had spears, short, sharp, with bone tips. The girl had a knife and a bow on her back. The girl was about 19, thin, wiry. Her dark hair was tied in a bun. Her eyes were black and wary. She looked at Hayden the way one looks at a strange beast that had strayed into the wrong territory. The map finally detected them. The men. Hunters. As at home in the swamp as a fish in water. Their muscles are sinewy, not an ounce of excess. Their movements are economical, precise. The girl, younger, faster, taut as a bowstring, ready to shoot. Hayden stopped. He slowly lowered his arms. He showed his empty palms. He said he'd come to talk, not to fight. One of the men said something in a language Hayden didn't know, guttural, fast, with hissing consonants. The girl replied in the same language. Then she turned to Hayden. She spoke in the language of Enwald, with an accent, a heavy one, but understandable. She asked what he wanted. Hayden replied that he needed to speak with the clan elder. The girl smirked. She said that all the dry ones were the same. They come and want to speak with the elder, as if the swamp folk had just one leader, like a herd. Hayden didn't argue. He asked who he could speak with then. The girl paused. Then she said, "Me." She acts as the translator. She decides who to let in. Hayden nodded. He asked her name. She said her name in the swamp language. It was long, unpronounceable for a dry one's tongue. Then she said that the dry ones called her Yoon, and that she didn't care what she was called. Hayden sat down on a mound, without waiting for an invitation, slowly, calmly, showing that he was in no hurry and wasn't afraid. Yoon watched. The men didn't lower their spears. Hayden began to speak, not about an alliance, not about trade, not about war. He told them about the mill, about the people, about Ira who heals, about Goran who forges, about Annalise who trades, about Renard whose son was born, about the child who cried for the first time under a stone roof in the middle of the marsh. He told the story the way stories are told by the campfire, simply, without pressure, without a goal. Yoon listened. Her expression didn't change, but she listened. When he finished, she asked why he told her all this. Hayden replied that he wanted her to know who lived next door, that he wasn't asking for anything. He wasn't offering anything. He was simply saying who he was and where he was from, because neighbors should know each other,
even if they aren't friends. Yoon translated for the men. They exchanged glances. One said something brief. Yoon turned to Hayden. She said he could leave. Alive. That was good enough. But if he came again uninvited, he'd leave without his fingers. Hayden stood up. He thanked her. He turned and walked back, his back to the 3 men with weapons. The map counted their every breath. They didn't move. He left. Halfway to the mill, the map showed something. A fresh set of tracks on the trail. Bare feet. Small ones. Yoon. She was following him, side by side, 100 paces to the west, watching him, checking where he would go. Hayden didn't let on. He walked steadily, toward the mill. Yoon followed him to the edge of his territory. Then she turned around and left. Hayden smiled, in the reeds, where no one could see him. A week later, Yoon came on her own, alone, unarmed. She stood at the edge of the islet and looked at the mill. Hayden went out to meet her. She said the elders had sent her to take a look, at the mill, at the people, at the blacksmith. Hayden led her inside. She walked around and looked. At Goran at the anvil, at Aira with her herbs, at Renard with the child in his one arm, at Annalise with her charcoal drawings on the bark, at all of it, small and fragile and alive. Yoon didn't say anything, but as she was leaving, she turned around. She looked at Hayden. She asked one question. She asked if he was of the dry or the marsh. Hayden replied that he was neither, that he was an outcast. Yoon nodded, as if that answer were the right one. She left. A month later, the Marsh clan began trading with the mill. Fish and hides in exchange for knives and salt, in silence, without a contract, without handshakes. Just one morning, a bundle of dried fish lay on the mill's threshold, and Yoon stood nearby, waiting. Hayden brought her 3 knives. She took them. She left. That's how it began. Meanwhile, Hayden didn't forget about the other map, the one concerning the dry lands. Maria worked with him every evening. They sat by the hearth, and she told him stories, names, titles, connections. Hayden absorbed it all. The map of the dry lands grew, more slowly than the map of the marshes, because he couldn't move about there freely, but every visit from Tobias added details. Every merchant at the trading post brought a scrap of information. Hayden pieced it all together into a single picture. The House of Westmar controlled 3 baronies north of the marshes. The Orwell lands now formally belonged to them. The Orwell peasants worked these lands. The same people, a different master. Taxes had doubled. 1/3 of the men had been taken to build the Westmar's new estate. The people were angry. Quietly, the way peasants are always angry, inside. But the anger was building up. Hayden marked this on the map. Another thread, another crack in the wall that he would use sooner or later. By the end of the 6th month, about 40 people lived in the marshes who were connected to Hayden in one way or another. Not all of them lived at the mill. The mill was the core. 3 small settlements sprang up around it, 4 or 5 people in each. Between them were trails known only to Hayden and those to whom he had shown them. A map, alive, growing, breathing. His map, his people, his swamp. The 7th month, summer in the marshes. Humid, hot, swarms of mosquitoes. Swamp gas rose in bubbles and stank so badly that by noon your eyes were watering. But business was moving forward. The Annalise trading post was up and running. 3 merchants came regularly. Swamp iron and herbs were sold. Silver came in. A little, but steadily. Annalise kept the books with a precision that amazed even Eldrick. Every coin, every sack, every knife. She knew where every penny was and where it was going. Hayden gave her complete freedom. He didn't interfere. She reported once a week, briefly, precisely, like an officer to a commander. Only she wasn't an officer, and he wasn't a commander. They were partners, and both of them remembered that. Yoon began to show up more often, once a week, then twice. She would come and go, silently. Sometimes she brought fish. Sometimes she just sat on the mill's roof and looked out at the swamp. Hayden left her alone. He didn't ask why she came. She didn't say anything. But the card saw. Yoon was lonely. In the clan, she was considered a half-blood. Her mother was from the marshes. Her father, a merchant from the south. Both were dead. She had grown up between 2 worlds, not marshy enough for the clan. To the people of the drylands, she was a creature from the swamps. She didn't belong anywhere. And here at the mill, among people who also didn't belong anywhere, she felt at home for the first time. Hayden understood this. The card showed it. The thread between him and Yoon was thin and prickly. She didn't trust him, but she kept coming. In the 8th week of summer, Hayden received news from Tobias that changed everything. Lord Gottfried Westmar uttered a phrase at a council meeting on his estate. a phrase overheard by a servant, relayed by a stable hand, picked up by a merchant, and reported by Tobias. "There's someone in the marshes." 4 words. Haden heard them and felt the map tremble. Not out of fear, out of anticipation. Westmar had finally noticed. So they'll be coming soon. Not 10 mercenaries. More serious, with a plan. Haden began to prepare. But first, he had to do something else. He was preparing for his first public appearance. Not as a wandering merchant, as a man. Maria had gotten him some clothes to the trading post. Decent ones, clean ones, a shirt made of fine linen, a dark gray cloak without any crests, boots that fit, not those swamp wrappings, real boots. Haden put them on and looked at his reflection in the water. A young man, 23 years old, a slender face, attentive eyes. He could have been the youngest son of any minor noble family, or a clerk, or a steward, anyone but what he actually was. Yoon was the first to see him in these clothes. She came in the morning with some fish and paused in the doorway. She looked at him for about 10 seconds. Then she said, "Are you still one of us? Or are you the little baron again?" Her voice was even, but the cards sensed the tension. Real tension. Yoon wasn't joking. She was afraid. Afraid that he would leave, that the dry lands would take him back, that he would turn out to be just like everyone else. Haden looked at her. He took off his cloak, hung it on a hook. He was left in a linen shirt. He said that the cloak was a tool, like a knife, like a map. He would put it on to get the job done and take it off when he returned. Yoon watched. She didn't quite believe it, but she nodded. Haden left that very night, alone, northward, across the marsh, across dry land, to the estate of the younger Westmar. Not the main one, not Lord Gottfried's, his second son's, Henrik Westmar, 25 years old. He manages the family's eastern lands. According to rumors from Tobias and Maria, Henrik isn't like his father. Softer, quieter, not a warrior, a scholar. He corresponds with scholars in the capital. His wife is from a southern house, quiet, unassuming. Henrik did not make the decision regarding the Orwell massacre. He doesn't make decisions at all. He listens to his father and nods. Haden didn't go there to kill him. He went there to use him. Henrik's estate stood on a hill 2 hours' journey from Topi. A stone house, not a castle, a house. 2 stories, a stable, a garden, a fence made of hewn stone, 4 guards. Haden lay in the bushes behind the fence and watched. 2 hours. He took it all in. The guards. Shifts changed every 4 hours. The right-hand post was weak. The guard there was elderly. He'd fall asleep by the 3rd watch. A back entrance to the kitchen. The door wasn't locked. The cook went to her room after dinner. She returned an hour before dawn. The study window on the 2nd floor. The light stays on until midnight. Henrik reads late into the night. Haden entered the manor through the kitchen, 1 hour past midnight. The guard at the right post was asleep. The kitchen door was unlocked. The hallway is dark. The staircase is to the right. 2nd floor, the study. The door is ajar, candlelight. Haden entered. Henrik Westmar was sitting at the table. A book lay before him, a glass of wine. He heard footsteps and looked up. He saw an unfamiliar young man in a gray cloak, in his own study, at 1 o'clock in the morning. Henrik turned pale. His hand reached for the bell on the table. Haden shook his head, quietly. Calm down. He said there was no need, that he hadn't come for that, that if he'd wanted to kill him, Henrik wouldn't be breathing anymore. Henrik froze. His hand hovered over the bell. Haden sat down in the chair across from him, like a guest, like an equal. He crossed his legs. It was a gesture not of threat, but of contempt for danger, a contempt that struck more powerfully than any weapon. He began to speak, not about revenge, not about the Toppies, about business. He said he knew about the Westmar's problems in the eastern lands. Peasants were fleeing, harvests were failing, tax revenues had fallen by 1/3 over the past year. The northern route was unsafe. Bandits. Henrik doesn't know that some of these bandits work for his own father. They rob competitors under a false flag. But sometimes they make a mistake and rob their own. Henrik listened. His expression changed. The pallor gave way to something else. Interest. Fear. But interest. Haden continued. He said he was neither a friend nor an enemy. A merchant. He has goods, swamp iron, herbs, and information. He's ready to trade. Not with the House of Westmar. With Henrik personally. Quietly. Without witnesses. For mutual benefit. Henrik asked why he needed this. Hayden replied that he needed a man in the dry lands, a man who wouldn't ask unnecessary questions, and who, in return, would receive information about what his father was doing behind his back. Henrik was silent for a long time. Then he asked who Hayden was. Hayden smiled. He said he was nobody, a non-entity, a shadow, a man who doesn't exist. And that's exactly why he knows what he knows.
Because shadows see more than people in the light. Henrik picked up a glass of wine. His hand was shaking. He drank. He set it back down. He said this was madness. Hayden nodded. He said madness is when your father is carving up the Baron's estates and you pretend not to know. Henrik turned pale again. Hayden stood up. He placed a folded sheet on the table. Not paper, a thin strip of birch bark. On it were 3 names. 3 stewards on Henrik's lands who were stealing his silver and sending it to his father, with amounts, with dates. Hayden said this was free, a gift. The next piece of information would come at a price. Not money, information. Answers to the questions Hayden would ask when he came again. He left the same way he'd come, through the kitchen, past the sleeping guard, into the night. Henrik Westmar sat in his study, staring at the 3 names on the birch bark, and for the first time in his life, he wondered what his father does on those nights he doesn't talk about at breakfast. Hayden returned to Topi at dawn. Maria was waiting for him. She asked how it went. Hayden answered with one word, seed. Maria understood. The seed had been planted. Now they had to wait. 2 weeks later, a reply came via Tobias. Henrik checked the 3 names. Everything was confirmed. The managers were indeed stealing. Henrik got rid of them. He put his own people in place. And through Tobias, he sent a single word. I'm listening. Hayden sat by the hearth and stared into the fire. The first thread into the Westmar household. Thin, invisible, but real. The 8th month, the end of summer. Hayden sat on the roof of the mill and looked at his map. Not the one in his head, the real one, drawn on tanned leather with charcoal and berry juice. Maria had insisted. She said that a map in his head was fine, but if he were killed, the map would die with him. He needed a copy, for those who would remain. Hayden drew for 3 nights. Trails, fordings, campsites, hiding places for knives, safe routes, dangerous sections, the trading post, the mill, 3 small camps, the swamp clan to the south. 43 people on the map, each with a name. Maria looked at the finished map and said nothing. Then she said that in her 6 years with Royal Intelligence, she'd never seen anything like it, that this wasn't a map, it was a living organism. Hayden rolled up the map and handed it to her. He said that if anything happened to him, the map would go to Maria. She knows what to do with it. Maria took it. She said nothing, but Hayden saw how her fingers clenched the leather, tightly, as if clutching at her last hope. A week later, what he'd been waiting for arrived. Tobias came running, gasping for breath. The Westmars are assembling a force, a large one, not 10 mercenaries, 200 spears, a real army, a punitive expedition against Topi. Lord Gottfried personally gave the order. The goal is to clear out the swamp, to burn everything that burns, to hang everyone they find. They have 3 weeks to assemble. Hayden listened. He let Tobias go. He sat down on a rock by the mill and closed his eyes. 200 spears. This isn't a trap at a ford. This is war. His 43 men against 200. Of his 43, maybe 5. They have knives, a few spears, 2 crossbows, not a single sword except for Goran's rusty scrap. Open combat is suicide, so there will be no open combat. Hayden opened his eyes and got to work. 3 weeks. He had 3 weeks to make sure this detachment never reached the mill. Not in the field, not at the ford, long before that. He called for Maria, Annalise, and Renard. The 4 of them sat by the hearth. Hayden spoke. 200 spears isn't 200 men. It's 200 men plus horses, plus a supply train with food, water, gunpowder, and tents, plus a blacksmith, plus a medic, plus a clerk to keep track of casualties, plus captains, plus messengers. It's a machine, and like any machine, it works as long as all its parts are in place. Remove one part, and the machine grinds to a halt. Hayden had no intention of attacking the soldiers. He planned to strike at the logistics. The first strike, the supply train. Through the trading post, Annalise had learned from the merchants where the Westmars sourced provisions for their detachment. 3 suppliers. 2 of them transport grain along the northern route. 1 brings salted meat and grains from the east. Hayden learned the routes and dates through Henrik.
Then he sent the peasant brothers and 2 new men out onto the route, not to rob, to intimidate. They stepped out onto the road ahead of the grain convoy. 5 men in swamp masks. They didn't see a single driver. They just stood on the trail, silently, for a minute. Then they disappeared into the fog. The drivers turned around and headed back. 3 days later, the same thing happened with the second convoy. This time, the brothers left a stone on the road with a word carved into it. Swamp. Just one word. The third supplier heard about the first 2 incidents and backed out on his own. No stones or masks. He simply didn't go. A week later, the Westmars discovered they had nothing to feed the 200 men on the expedition. The second blow. The captains. Maria knew how a mercenary army worked. The captains with a backbone. Soldiers fight for money, but follow their captains. Take out the captain, and the company falls apart. No need to kill. You have to make sure the captain doesn't show up. Through a network of contacts, Hayden reached 3 of the unit's 5 captains. 1 owed money to a merchant who traded with the trading post. Through Annalise, Hayden paid off that debt. Now the captain owed him, without knowing it. Through a front man, the captain was told that his debt would be forgiven if he fell ill on the day of departure. The captain fell ill. The second captain was drinking, heavily. Maria found out that he had a mistress in the village whom he was hiding from his wife. Through Tobias, a letter purportedly from the captain's wife was delivered to the mistress. The captain dropped everything and rushed to the village to put out a fire that didn't exist. 2 days later, he learned he'd been deceived, but it was too late. His position had been taken by the third captain, the most dangerous one, a veteran. You can't bribe him. You can't deceive him. Hayden came to see him in person, at night, just as he had with Henrik, only not in the office, but in a tent on the outskirts of the camp. The captain woke up to a cold blade at his throat. He saw a man in a gray cloak. Hayden made no threats. He placed a document in front of the captain, the Westmar family seal, Gottfried's signature, an order, a genuine one, obtained by Henrik from his father's office, an order to execute 30 peasants from the village where the captain was born, for non-payment. The execution was scheduled for the following month. Hayden said he could stop it if the captain left the detachment, quietly, without a fuss. He simply wouldn't show up for roll call. The captain read the document. His hands didn't tremble. His face was stony. Then he looked at Hayden. He asked where he'd gotten the Westmar seal. Hayden didn't answer. The captain thought for a minute. Then he nodded. He said he wouldn't be there in the morning. Hayden left. In the morning, the captain wasn't there. The third blow. Gunpowder. The simplest. Hayden used a map to find where the Westmars stored gunpowder for the detachment, a shed on the edge of the estate. 1 guard. Hayden didn't steal the gunpowder. He waited for rain. Then, at night, he removed 3 boards from the shed's roof, carefully, so it wouldn't be noticeable from the outside. The downpour did the rest. By morning, the gunpowder was wet, all of it. The guard discovered it 2 days later. By then, it was too late. 3 weeks later, the Westmar detachment left the estate. Not 200 spears, 120, without 2 captains, with provisions for a week instead of 3, without gunpowder. They reached the edge of the marshes, set up camp, stayed there for 4 days. On the second day, desertions began. On the third, the horses fell ill. Bad water. Hayden had poisoned the only stream near their camp. Not with poison, with swamp clay that causes excruciating stomach cramps. Not fatal, but a horse that can't stand, can't carry a rider. On the 4th day, the detachment turned around and left, without a single battle, without a single casualty on either side. Hayden stood at the edge of the marshes and watched as the last riders disappeared down the road. The map pulsed. Victory. But not the kind they take pride in, the kind built from 100 small moves made over the 3 weeks leading up to the first shot. Renard stood beside him. He watched the retreating detachment. Then he turned to Hayden. He said he was starting to fear him. Hayden looked at him. Renard wasn't joking. Hayden nodded. He said that was right. He was a little afraid of himself too. Fall. A year in the marshes. Hayden sat by the hearth and looked at the people who had come to him over the past month. Envoys. 5 people from 4 minor houses that the Westmores and other great houses had struck from the house registers over the past 10 years. House Tarn, House Ellis, House Vale, House Crow. All minor houses. All destroyed. All with the same story. Their lands taken. Their names struck from the register. The survivors scattered across the marshes and slums. They had heard of the marsh leader, the man who forced 200 Westmar spears to retreat without a fight. They came to plead. Hayden listened to each one. The map absorbed it all. New names, new threads, new cracks in the wall of Onwald. When the last messenger finished, Hayden was silent for a moment. Then he said he wasn't raising an army of vengeance, that he was building a place, a territory, where the erased ceased to be erased. Not because someone had written them back in, but because here, the book doesn't matter. The emissaries listened. Not all of them understood, but they all nodded. One of them, an old knight of House Tarn, one-armed like Renard, asked if this place had a name. Hayden looked out the window, at the marsh, at the fog, at the gray water. He said it did. The Lowlands, with a capital L, like the land, like the territory. The old knight nodded. He said he would go back to his people. He would tell them. Hayden said he was in no hurry, that the door was open, but they must enter one at a time, quietly, without banners or trumpets. The time for trumpets had not yet come.
Meanwhile, something happened in the camp that Hayden hadn't planned on. He found Lynette. No, Lynette found him, through Tobias. The boy brought strange news. A girl lives at St. Agnes's convent on the Western Road. Young, fair-haired, she tends to the wounded. The nuns call her Sister Helen. But one of the merchants at the trading post told Annalise that he'd seen her a year ago in another place, under a different name, that she looked like the girl from the Orwell household. Hayden froze when he heard this. The memory flashed back. The memories of the old Hayden came flooding back. Lynette, his cousin, his mother's sister's daughter. She was 14 when that night happened. He thought she was dead. Everyone thought she was dead. Hayden left the next day, alone, westward, toward the monastery. He walked for 2 days, through the Topi, through the dry lands. The map covered new territory with every step. The monastery stood on a hill, stone walls, a garden, silence, the scent of incense and apples. Hayden entered through the gate. He didn't hide, dressed as a traveler. He asked for water and a place to stay for the night. The nun at the gate let him in, an elderly woman, blind in one eye. She didn't ask a single question. He found her in the infirmary wing, a 17-year-old girl, blonde hair gathered under a nun's headscarf. Slender hands, familiar hands, hands he had seen in someone else's memory. She was feeding a wounded peasant with a spoon, carefully, patiently. She raised her head. She saw Hayden. She froze. The spoon stopped halfway. They looked at each other. Hayden saw in her eyes what the map could not show. Recognition. She recognized him. Not him, that boy. That Hayden who existed before Earth, before death, before the swamp. She dropped the spoon. She stood up. She pressed her palm to her mouth. Her eyes glistened. Hayden approached, close, quietly. She whispered his name. He nodded. She embraced him, tightly. So tightly that the wound beneath her ribs, which had long since healed, suddenly throbbed as if it were fresh. Or was it something else? Lynette Orwell, alive, hidden by her wet nurse on the night of the massacre, taken to a convent under a false name. For 3 years she'd believed she was the last one left, that everyone was dead, that the name Orwell was gone forever. And now here he was, standing before her, alive. Different, but alive. They talked until morning. Lynette told him about that night, about how the wet nurse had carried her out through the back door while people were being killed inside the house, about the smell of smoke, about the screams, about the road in the dark, about the monastery, about 3 years of silence and prayers and a name that wasn't her own. Hayden listened. He didn't interrupt. The map pieced her story together alongside his own, 2 life paths that had diverged one night and had now converged. In the morning, Hayden told her the truth. Not all of it, but enough. He said he was building a place for those who'd been written off, that this place needed an infirmary, a real one, with someone who knew how to care for the wounded. Lynette listened. Then she asked what he'd been afraid to hear. She asked what had happened to him, why he was different, why he looked like a man in his 40s instead of 23. Why he spoke as if someone else lived inside him. Hayden remained silent. Lynette didn't press him. She said she would go with him, that the monastery had been a refuge, but not a home, that home was where family was, and that she was his only family. They left the monastery 2 days later. They walked slowly. Lynette wasn't used to long walks. Hayden adjusted his pace. He didn't rush her. 2 days later, they arrived at the mill. Aira saw Lynette. She looked at Hayden. He said she was his sister. Aira nodded. She took Lynette in. She gave her some warm broth, a blanket, and a spot by the hearth. Lynette sat wrapped in the blanket, looking around, at the stone walls, at the people, at Goran with his hammer, at Renard and Aiden, and at Yoon, who had come that same evening and was sitting on the roof as always. Lynette looked at Hayden. She said she understood now, that he was rebuilding what had been taken from them. Not a house, a family. Hayden didn't reply. He went outside. He stood by the mill wall. He looked at the fog. The map pulsed quietly. Lynette was the living thread connecting him to who he used to be, to the boy who had been erased. This thread was the thinnest and most important of all on his map, because all the other threads told him who he was now, but this one told him who he had been. A year and 3 months in the marshes. Fall had turned to winter, his second winter. But this winter was different. The lowlands had expanded. About 60 people, 3 anchor points connected by hidden trails, the mill, the old monastery that Hayden had found in the south and turned into headquarters, and Annalise's trading post on the northern border, which now traded not only with small merchants, but also directly with 2 baronies, marsh iron, herbs, Aira's ointments, which cured fever better than any doctor in the capital. Salt was being shipped back, fabrics, grain, tools. The lowlands sustained themselves, not luxuriously, but sufficiently. Hayden stood in the monastery's main hall. Stone walls, high ceiling, narrow windows. On the table in front of him lay a map, that very one, on tanned leather. Only now it was 3 times larger. It covered the entire territory of the lowlands and the 3 baronies surrounding it. Next to the map lay a notebook, thin, with a leather binding. Annalise had sewn the cover. Eldrick had transcribed the contents. Maria had dictated them. Hayden had compiled them. A dossier on Lord Gottfried Westmar. 3 years of work. Every page is a fact, not a rumor, not a suspicion, a fact, with dates, with names, with amounts. The Orwell Massacre, date, names of the mercenaries, payment amount, the channel through which the money flowed, Gottfried's signature on the order, the Westmar House seal, the destruction of the Tarn House, same scheme, same mercenaries, different payment channel, same seal, the fabrication of the Kane family's debts, forged documents, the signature of the judge to whom Gottfried paid a pension, the testimony of 3 witnesses whom Maria found and recorded, and at the very end, a letter, a single letter from Lord Chancellor Onwald to Gottfried Westmar, bearing the Chancellery's seal, dated 3 days before the Orwell massacre, a letter in which the Chancellor approves the removal of the name Orwell from the family register, 3 days before the family was murdered, approval prior to the crime. This isn't just evidence, it's a death sentence. Henrik Westmar retrieved this letter from his father's safe, risking his life. Hayden hadn't asked him to do it. Henrik did it on his own. Over the course of a year and a half of secret correspondence with Hayden, he'd seen enough to understand who his father was, and he decided he didn't want to be his heir in this matter. Hayden closed the notebook. He placed his palm on the cover, thin leather beneath his fingers. Inside were 3 years of others' crimes, recorded in Eldrick's neat handwriting. It was a weapon, stronger than any sword. Maria stood against the wall, her arms crossed, watching. She knew what was in that notebook. She had helped compile it. She said it was time. Hayden nodded. It was time. Meanwhile, Cassandra Rain made contact, not directly, but through the network. The wife of Westmar's second son, a prisoner in her own estate. She had been passing documents to Hayden for half a year, through a maid, through a merchant, through 3 pairs of hands. No 2 pairs knew the others. Maria built the network. Hayden mapped out the routes. Cassandra supplied the content. They met in person for the first time at the beginning of winter. Cassandra arrived at the Annalise trading post, posing as a customer looking to buy medicinal ointments. Tall, dark hair, a calm face. Too calm. The face of someone who has lived in a cage for a long time and grown accustomed to the bars. Hayden looked at her. She was sharp, smart, observant, used to playing a role. Beneath the mask of calm lay steel, or despair. Sometimes they're one and the same. Cassandra looked at him. She said she'd imagined him to be older. Hayden replied that he was older than he looked. Cassandra smiled slightly, her first smile in a long time. They talked for an hour. Cassandra told him about life at the Westmar estate, about her husband, who didn't beat her, but didn't see her either, about her father-in-law, who treated her like a piece of furniture, about the rooms she wasn't allowed to leave, about the letters they read before she could send them. She was property, with a surname and a title, but still property. Hayden listened. Then he said he could get her out. Not save her, get her out. The difference is important. Salvation is when you're carried away. Getting out is when you're given a rope and you climb out yourself. Cassandra asked how. Hayden said he would stage her death, carefully, convincingly, so that her husband and father-in-law would genuinely believe it. Cassandra thought, for a long time. Then she asked what would happen next. Hayden replied that afterward she would choose a name for herself, any name, whatever she wanted, and she would live under that name in Nizzen,
free.
Cassandra looked at him. Something had changed in her eyes. Not hope yet, but a glimmer of hope. She nodded.
The plan took a month. Maria was in charge. Hayden drew the sketches. Cassandra played her part. It all began with an illness. Cassandra started coughing. Then she took to her bed. Her husband called the doctor. The doctor was a real one, but the herbs Cassandra was secretly taking, prescribed by Era, produced all the symptoms of consumption: fever, cough, pallor, weakness. After 2 weeks, her husband stopped entering her room. He was afraid of contagion. After 3 weeks, Cassandra asked to be moved to the country house for the air and peace. Her husband agreed with relief. At the country house, there was 1 male servant and 1 female servant. The female servant was one of Hayden's people. A week later, one night, Cassandra slipped out through the back door. Her dress and a note were left on the riverbank. 2 words: forgive me. Sin. A drowned woman. Her body was never found. The river's current was strong. It carried her away. Her husband mourned for 3 days, her father-in-law for 2. A month later, she was forgotten. Cassandra arrived in Nizina at night, wet,
Frozen. Alive. Hayden met her at the monastery's threshold. She stood there, looking at the stone walls, at the fires in the windows, at the people. Hayden asked what name she had chosen. Cassandra thought for a moment. Then she said she would remain Cassandra, that this was her name, the only thing that belonged to her. She would take it with her into her new life. Hayden nodded. Lynette came out to her. She gave her a blanket, a hot brew, a spot by the hearth. Yoon sat in the corner and looked at Cassandra with curiosity. Then she said that for a drowned woman, she didn't look too bad. Annalise didn't look up from her papers. She said that Yoon should finish her porridge before commenting on someone else's appearance. Maria smiled quietly in the corner. Garan was hammering behind the wall. Renard was rocking Aiden. Era was drying herbs. The monastery was alive. Nizina was alive. Hayden looked at his people and felt the map inside him humming softly, like a taut string. All the threads were in place. Everyone was in place. Soon, so soon, he would make his final move. The end of the 2nd year. Winter was receding. Nizina was waiting. Hayden was waiting too, but he wasn't idle. For the past 3 months, he had been laying the groundwork for what was to come. Through Henrik Westmar, he learned that the old king of Ainwald had died, quietly, in his sleep. The heir was weak, young, not yet crowned. The great houses are squabbling over influence. The chancellor is clinging to his seat with his fingernails. The Westmars want more. Gottfried has his sights set on becoming the king's right-hand man. To do that, he needs success, a victory, something spectacular. The Marsh Prince is the perfect target. Declare a campaign, destroy the lowlands, bring back the leader's head, become a hero, sit beside the throne. Hayden knew this because Henrik knew it, and for the first time in his life, he acted on his own, not at his father's behest, not out of habit, on his own. He passed his father's plan on to Hayden. Gottfried wasn't gathering 200 lancers, 3,000, a royal charter, an ecclesiastical tribunal charging them with witchcraft, a personal decree from the new king, which Gottfried had already secured. This wasn't a punitive expedition. It was a war of annihilation. Hayden read Henrik's report. He sat in the silence of the monastery. He stared at the wall. 3,000 against his 60. No, 80 now. People kept coming. But 80 against 3,000 isn't a war. It's a funeral. He couldn't pull off the logistics trick again, not on this scale. 3,000 copies of the Royal Charter, that's the state apparatus. It has 10 suppliers instead of 3, 20 captains instead of 5, gunpowder depots in a fortress, not in a shed. Hayden couldn't break it from the inside, not in the few weeks he had left. So he wouldn't try to break it. He'd do what he'd always done, find a crack that was already there, and he'll press on it. The crack was in the notebook, a thin, leather-bound notebook, a dossier. Hayden called everyone together: Maria, Annalise, Renard, Yoon, Era, Cassandra, Lynette, Goran, Aldrich, the brothers, everyone, in the monastery hall, all together for the first time. Hayden stood at the table with the map. He spoke, quietly, calmly, as always. He said 3,000 were coming, that he wouldn't run, that he wouldn't fight, that he would go out to meet them, alone, on the old stone bridge, the one that separates the dry lands from the marshes, with the notebook. Silence. Maria spoke first. She said it was suicide, that Gottfried would kill him on the spot and take the notebook. Hayden shook his head. He said he wouldn't kill him, because Gottfried wouldn't know how many copies there were of this notebook, and who would get them if Hayden didn't return. Annalisa said that one notebook wasn't enough, that Gottfried could destroy the evidence and deny everything. Hayden nodded. He said that's why there wouldn't be just one notebook, that Cassandra had already made 3 copies. One would be sent by courier to the capital, directly to the young king, bypassing the chancellor. It would go through a man Hayden had found over the past month, a former servant of the royal court who'd been dismissed for drunkenness. He's been living in Topia for a year now. He's sobered up. He misses the palace. He's ready to deliver it. The second copy will go to the head of House Ardmore, the third great house, a rival of the Westmars, via Maria, who knows his people. The third will remain with Henrik, in case his father survives and tries to deny everything. Hayden wasn't betting on a single move. He was betting on 4. Yoon listened in silence. Then she asked what would happen to them, the people of the marshes. If the plan worked and the Westmars fell, what would change for those in the marshes? Hayden looked at her. He said that the goal wasn't to destroy the Westmars. The goal was to rewrite the book. That very same family register where people are struck from the records. He wanted the name Orwell to appear in it again, and next to it, the names of those who had been erased along with him, so that no more children could ever be erased in a single night. Yoon looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded. She said that in that case, she would go with him, to the bridge. Hayden said he would go to the bridge alone. Yoon said he would go to the bridge alone, and she would stand behind him, with everyone else, so that those 3,000 would see who he was speaking for. Hayden wanted to object. Maria beat him to it. She said that Yoon was right, that one person on the bridge is a negotiator, but one person on the bridge with his people standing behind him is the state. Hayden looked at Maria, at Yoon, at Annalise, who was already counting how many people they could gather, at Renard, who was checking the blade of his axe with one hand, at Era, who was silently packing a bag of poultices, at Lynette, who was sitting in the corner embroidering something on gray cloth, at Cassandra, who was copying the 4th copy of the notebook in case 3 weren't enough, at Goran, who was sharpening knives. He realized that arguing was pointless, not because they weren't listening to him, but because they were right. The messengers left that very day. The former servant headed for the capital. Maria's man went to the Ardmore estate. Henrik received his copy through Tobias. 3 threads stretched from the lowlands into the drylands, thin, invisible, deadly. Hayden stood on the monastery roof and looked north. Somewhere out there, 3,000 copies were gathering. Gottfried Westmar was donning his armor. The ecclesiastical tribunal was drafting charges of witchcraft. The young king was affixing his seal to the decree without reading it. And Hayden stood on the roof and waited. The map pulsed. All the strings were taut. Everyone was in position. All the moves had been made. All that remained was to step onto the bridge. The bridge was old. The stone was gray with moss. An arch spanned the channel that separated the dry lands from the marshes. 1,000 years ago, the legions of that empire, which now lies at the bottom of the swamp, had marched across it. Now, no one walked across it. The bridge belonged to no one. Not the dry lands, nor was it of the marshes. That was precisely why Hayden had chosen it. He stepped onto the bridge at dawn, alone. A gray cloak. Under the cloak, a thin, leather-bound notebook. Nothing else. No weapons, no armor. Fog lay over the water like a blanket. The air was cold. It smelled of peat and wet stone. An army stood on the north side of the bridge. 3,000 spears. Hayden had seen them an hour before dawn. The map had shown it. Red dots stretching from horizon to horizon. Cavalry, infantry, supply trains, the Westmar banners, a green fox on a white field. Next to it, the crown's banner, a golden lion. Next to it, the standard of the ecclesiastical tribunal, a silver circle on a black background. The 3 powers, all against him. At the head of the army, mounted on a horse, sat Lord Gottfried Westmar, 52 years old, a gray beard trimmed short, full armor, the family sword at his belt. Beside him stood a church hierarch in black vestments, the royal herald holding a decree in his hand, and his son, not Henrik, the eldest, Victor Westmar, the heir, broad-shouldered, his father's face. Hayden stepped out onto the middle of the bridge. He stopped. He stood and waited. Gottfried saw him, a lone figure on the bridge, a young man in a gray cloak. No banner, no retinue, no weapons. Gottfried ordered the army to halt. He rode forward, alone, on horseback. He approached the bridge. He dismounted, with difficulty. His armor clanked. He stepped onto the bridge. 2 men, one in armor with a sword, the other in a cloak with a notebook, 10 paces between them. Gottfried looked at Hayden. Hayden looked at Gottfried.
The map was counting Lord Westmar. Tired eyes. He hadn't slept. His breathing was heavy. The armor weighed him down. He wasn't young enough for such a burden. His right hand trembled slightly, not from fear, from the cold, or from his age. Gottfried spoke. His voice was deep, commanding. He was used to being obeyed. He asked if he was the very same Prince of the Marshes. Hayden replied that he was no prince, that he was Hayden Orwell. Gottfried heard the surname. Something flashed in his eyes. He recognized it. Not the face, the last name. He remembered that last name. He himself had crossed it out of the book. Gottfried said there were no more Orwells, that the surname was dead, that the boy standing before him was a nobody, a ghost, and that he wasn't afraid of ghosts. Hayden bent down. He placed the notebook on the bridge's stones. He straightened up. He said 4 words. "Read it aloud, my lord." Gottfried looked at the notebook, then at Hayden, then back at the notebook. He didn't pick it up. He asked what it was. Hayden replied that these were his own letters, his orders, his seals, his signatures, from the past 10 years. Every massacre, every strike-through, every bribed judge, every mercenary he'd paid. And at the end, a letter from the Chancellor who had approved the destruction of the wells 3 days before the assassins arrived. Gottfried didn't move. Hayden continued. He said this wasn't the only copy, that right now, 1 copy lay on the young king's desk. Another was with the head of the Ardmore house. The third was with Henrik, with his own son, who had decided he didn't want to inherit his father's filth. At the mention of Henrik's name, Gottfried flinched, as if struck. Hayden saw it. The map showed how the pulse in Gottfried's neck leapt, how his pupils dilated, how the knuckles on his fingers turned white as he gripped the hilt of his sword. Gottfried said it was a lie, that it was a forgery, that the seals were fake. Hayden shook his head. He said the seals were genuine, that Gottfried could verify it right now, that his captains were standing behind him, and his son, and the church hierarch, and the royal herald. Let everyone look. Let everyone read. Gottfried leaned forward, slowly. He picked up the notebook, opened it. The first page. Hayden watched as his eyes scanned the lines, as his face changed. First, contempt, then wariness, then recognition. He recognized the very first page, his own handwriting, his own seal, his own order. Gottfried raised his head. He looked at Hayden. For the first time, without arrogance, with something else, with understanding. He understood. Not everything, but enough. He realized that the boy he'd ordered to be thrown into the swamp had spent 3 years gathering every scrap of his filth. Patiently, methodically, like a hunter who takes his time because he knows the prey has nowhere to run. Behind Gottfried there was a stir. The captains saw his face. They saw that he had turned pale. They saw the notebook in his hands. Victor, his eldest son, rode closer. He asked what was happening. Gottfried didn't answer. He stood there, staring at the notebook. Silence. Long. Heavy. A bridge. Fog. 2 people. 1 notebook. And in that silence, people began to emerge from the fog behind Hayden. Quietly. Unarmed. They were simply walking. Maria came out first, upright, tall, her braid draped over her shoulder. Behind her was Yoon, barefoot, as always, even in winter. Her face was calm. Behind her was Era, thin, red-haired, her left arm in a sling. She was carrying a bag of herbs. Behind her was Annalise, back straight, chin up, her eyes were clear. Next to her was Lucas. He was holding his sister's hand. Behind them was Renard. With one hand he held Aiden, wrapped in a blanket, close to him. Next to him was Oda. Behind them was Cassandra, the woman the Westmarys had believed dead for 3 years. Alive, with the steady gaze of someone who fears nothing anymore. Behind them was Goran, holding a hammer. Eldrick with his cracked glasses, the peasants, an old knight of House Tarn, a scribe, a thief who became a scout, an old woman with her granddaughter, that very same 4-year-old girl who used to never say a word. Now she's 5, and she stands there, staring at the army with her gray eyes. Behind them, more, and more, and more. 200 people from the lowlands, unarmed, just standing there, in silence. Each of them is a cast-off. Each is a person whom Ainwald had cast out, and each is alive. Gottfried looked at them. The army behind him looked. The captains, the soldiers, the herald, the hierarch, everyone was watching. And then Lynette stepped forward, last of all. small, fair-haired, 17 years old, a gray banner in her hands, an empty shield, the banner of Nazina. Only now it was no longer empty. Lynette had sewn it for 3 nights. She hadn't slept. She sewed by candlelight, with a fine needle, neat stitches, a single line, embroidered in the center of the empty shield.
A single word. Orwell. Lynette stood next to Hayden. She raised the banner. The wind caught the fabric. The gray canvas unfurled. The letters emerged like a developing photograph. 1 line, 1 name. A name that had been crossed out. A name that had survived. Gottfried looked at the banner, then at Hayden, then at the notebook in his hands. His army stood behind him. 3,000 copies, waiting for an order. Gottfried could give the order. He could send the cavalry against the 200 unarmed men on the bridge. He could burn the notebook. He could kill Hayden right here. But the copies were already with the king, with Ardmore, with Henrik. Every move had been calculated. Every thread was in place. Every move had been made 3 years before this very moment. Gottfried stood on the bridge and, for the first time in his life, didn't know what to do. He was a clever man, cruel, calculating, but clever, and he understood. Not right away, but he understood. The boy hadn't come to fight. The boy had come to show him that the war was already lost. That it had been lost the moment Hayden crawled out of the swamp with his hands bound and a hole in his side and began to count. Gottfried closed the notebook, slowly. He looked at Hayden, one last time, eye to eye. Hayden did not look away. Gottfried turned around. He walked toward his horse. He mounted the horse, heavily, silently. The army watched. Gottfried raised his hand. He turned his horse northward, and 3,000 lances slowly moved after him, away from the bridge, away from Topi, away from Nazina. Hayden stood on the bridge and watched them leave. A month later, Lord Gottfried Westmar died at his estate, suddenly, from a blow. So it was written in the chronicles. Henrik became head of the house. By his first decree, he acknowledged all his father's debts to the lesser houses. With his second decree, he returned the lands to the Orwells. With his third, he knelt before the envoy from Nazina and took the oath. The envoy was Yoon, barefoot, wearing a marsh jacket, with a knife at her belt. She stood in the marble hall of the Westmar estate and administered the oath to the heir of the great house. Not as a marsh dweller, not as a half-blood, as an ambassador. The young king received a notebook. He read it. He summoned the chancellor. The chancellor fled that very night. He was found a week later, in the marshes. He had tried to hide in the swamp, an irony Maria would have appreciated. 3 months after the bridge, a ceremony took place in the capital of Anwald. Small, quiet, without fanfare, in the presence of the young king and 10 witnesses. The royal scribe opened the family register, a thick volume in a leather binding, page 412, line 16, crossed out in black ink 3 years ago. The scribe dipped his pen in red ink. Over the black line, he wrote a single word, Orwell. Below that, another name, Tarn. Below that, Ellis. Below that, Vale. Below that, Crow. 5 crossed-out names written back in, red over black. Hayden stood in the hall and watched. Lynette was beside him. She was crying, quietly, for the first time in 3 years. Hayden wasn't crying. He looked at the line in the book and felt the map inside him grow still. Not fade away, grow still, like a beast that had run for a long time and finally lay down. On the way back to Nazina, they all walked together, Hayden in front. Behind him, Maria and Annalise. Behind them, Yoon and Ira. Lynette with Cassandra, Renard with Oda and Aiden. Goron with a hammer slung over his shoulder. Eldrick, wiping his glasses. Everyone. They walked across that very same bridge, through that very same ford, along those very same paths, past the mill where it all began, past the hut where Hayden found Aira, past the channel where Derek Fall drowned, past the false ford where 8 mercenaries lie, through the swamp, through the fog, home. Hayden walked, feeling every step. The map sang, softly. Every trail, every stone, every person, all in their place, all alive, all his. That evening at the monastery, Hayden sat by the hearth. Lynette brought a bowl of soup, hot. Yoon sat on the floor, sharpening a knife. Annalise was counting something in her notebook. Maria stood by the window, gazing at the fog. Goran was hammering behind the wall. Renard was rocking his son. Aira was drying herbs. Cassandra was writing something, her own words. For the first time in her life, not someone else's letters, but her own. Yoon looked up. She looked at Hayden. She asked what he was going to do now. Hayden looked at her.
at all of them, at the small room full of people he had found, whom he had gathered, whom he had refused to let be erased. He said nothing, that he would just sit there.
"Here's some soup." Lynette set a bowl in front of him. Yoon rolled her eyes. She said that everyone was afraid of the great strategist of Nazina. Annalise, without looking up from her notebook, said that Yoon should finish her porridge before criticizing. Maria smiled quietly. Garan struck the wall with a hammer, a ringing sound, steady, like a heartbeat. Hayden ate his soup, hot, salty, cooked by Era from the herbs he'd once brought her to the hut, those very same herbs. He ate and stared into the fire, and somewhere, deep beneath the black water, in the flooded ruins dating back 1,000 years, the old archive pulsed quietly. It waited, patiently, just as it had waited for 1,000 years. A new entry appeared in its gigantic catalogs. Fresh, vivid, Hayden Orwell, operator, active, and next to it, a note that none of his predecessors had ever had before, stable. And in the very depths of the topes, in a cave overgrown with moss and roots, the old madman who had waited 1,000 years for a successor raised his head. He looked into the darkness, and for the first time in centuries, he smiled, quietly, like a man who can finally fall asleep.